was a really good outing. Pounded the zone with everything, sinker and slider. Played well. A lot of swing and miss on the slider. They didn't see it well. Was playing really good off of the sinker. But overall, that was a really nice job to get us through 7.
That was Ollie Marmol last night talking about Dakota Hudson and his impressive outing. Hey, man, credit where it's due. You guys know I am not the biggest Dakota Hudson fan, audio courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest, but that was a nice outing by him. Took a no-hitter midway through that game, ended up giving you 7 innings. He's the first pitcher for the Cardinals, not named Jack Flaherty, Jordan Montgomery, or Miles Michaelis to go at least 7 on the Cardinals season. Gets through 7, gives up just 2 hits in that game. 3 earned runs, did have the 3 walks, but most of those came later. 7 strikeouts, which was nice to see out of Dakota Hudson as well. Alex, this is your boy, but yesterday...
No, we don't have to go back to yesterday. No.
This is what Alex Ferrario said about him.
Just make it a revolving door of Liberatore, Thomas, Graceffo, McGreevy. I don't need, as much as I love Dakota Hudson, and I'll give him his eulogy if he's not a Cardinal over in the offseason, but I don't need to see that anymore. So I actually think Dakota Hudson wouldn't be worth, depending on what he's going to get in the offseason, as a bullpen arm. But I'm not going to pay him $5-6 million to be in my bullpen.
Look.
Wow.
That was 24 hours ago, man.
No, less than 24 hours.
You flip-flop more than I do.
Look. When you get into fights with people that you love, sometimes in the midst of rage, you say things that you regret. When you stew on it for 24 hours, you go and sit in silence in a dark room and think about how cruel you were. It comes back and bites you, and you recognize, like, hey, that was too aggressive. Maybe I need to pump the brakes a little bit. And when I saw Dak do yesterday, I said, sir, I remember this. And this was an ace. This was the ace caliber. And you know what? What made it even better with Dak was after the game, when he then quotes Michael G. Scott and says, I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious about not changing his jersey.
You know what? He's winning you one quote over a time.
You're damn right.
Take 2. One quote at a time. Here's what Dakota Hudson had to say after the game last night.
If Waino's not moving from his seat, I'm not changing uniforms. Not that I'm superstitious, but I'm a little. A little stitious.
See, right there is what we needed, Dak. You showed us what you had, and look, there was something that somebody tweeted me last night, and I thought it was perfect. He's not the ace, he's the ace St. Louis deserves, but not the one it needs right now. We'll hunt him because we can take it, because he's not our hero. He's the silent guardian. He's the watchful protector. He is the Dak Knight. Thanks, Joshua Jacobs, for tweeting that to me, because Dakota Hudson's back. He is bleeping back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the rotation. If Steven Matz can turn it around, Dakota Hudson can.
Do you honestly believe that?
No.
Because apparently Randy Carricker does. You want to hear what he had to say earlier today? You wouldn't be alone. You've got good company. Here's Randy earlier today on the opening drive.
Guys, the Cardinals need pitching, right? What if I offered you a starting pitcher that won twice as many decisions as he lost? What if I offered you a pitcher that had a career earned run average of 3.64 and over his career had averaged 6.3 strikeouts per 9 innings? What if I offered you a pitcher like that? That pitcher's name is Dakota Hudson.
I knew this is where you were going with that.
You just need to get the guy reps and let him pitch, because when you have let him pitch, his 162 game averages are 13-7 with a 3.64. Maybe the guy just needs an opportunity.
There's a reason he didn't read the walks per 9.
That was one bad season.
I also like the 6 strikeouts per 9 innings.
I'll take that. He's a pitch-to-contact kind of guy.
That wasn't the worst in all of Major League Baseball.
He's a pitch-to-contact kind of guy. Look, I'm not...
He was bad in AAA this year, guys.
Well, he just never really got the opportunity.
Some stuff in perspective?
He never got the opportunity. What I said yesterday was too aggressive.
He started every 6th day down there.
Just didn't like the barbecue down there.
What I said yesterday was too aggressive. I think he can be one of the guys that you put in your rotation, but I'm not relying on him to be in my rotation. Does that make sense? Like, he shows you the ability to get you one good start every once in a while. Guess what, Dak? You gave us some hope, and maybe they'll throw him out there once again. But what I'm not going to do is see one good start against the Minnesota Twins and say, oh boy, howdy, Dakota Hudson in my rotation. You can compete for it next year, sir, but I'd like to see this 5 more times before the end of the season.
And you're not going to see it. You know why? Because his next start's scheduled to be against Tampa Bay. And by the way, he should make that start. You earned it. You go 7 innings, you give up basically nothing from the opposition. Yeah, you've earned the right to go out there for your next start. I'll give him that, if nothing else. Like, I'm not a completely cold-hearted jerk.
Yeah, you are.
Just mostly a cold-hearted jerk on this show here on 101 ESPN. Dakota Hudson, listen, it's not about opportunity. He's gotten plenty of opportunities here in St. Louis. He hasn't been healthy. If you can't make it onto the field, that's a you problem, man. And like, I feel bad for him because he's a pitcher and this is how it goes. Pitchers break. When he was healthy, he was a pretty darn good pitcher, Alex. He hasn't been healthy in a long time, and now that he is, he's not the same guy that he once was. Same conversation that we had with Jack Flaherty, but not the same upside as we talked about with Jack Flaherty. Dakota Hudson had a 6 ERA down in AAA this year.
That's AAA. It's not the majors.
He allowed 13 hits per 9 innings while he was down there. His whip, walks, and hits per innings pitched was nearly 2. All of this is his AAA statistics against lesser opponents than what he would see in the big leagues. This is not about opportunity for Dakota Hudson. This is about a lack of execution. He doesn't get it in the strike zone enough, and when he does, a lot of the time he's nibbling and then he leaves a cookie out over the plate. He doesn't have the kind of stuff that you need to be really a strikeout type of a guy. Dakota Hudson is a perfectly fine number 5 starter for a non-contending team. And that's what the Cardinals are right now. So go ahead, throw him out there. That's fine. But if Dakota Hudson is your number 5 starter going into next season, I think something has gone horribly awry for the Cardinals this offseason.
I don't think it's a bad thing having him in the conversation, though, for next season. I don't think you should completely write it off and say, well, Dakota Hudson's not back next year. Because, frankly, yes, he has not been good over the last few seasons, which is why I made my aggressive statement yesterday. Sorry, Dak. But he is the only one that's got actual innings at the major leagues, depending on what you do the rest of the season with some of these guys that you're going to be relying on next year for that 5th man spot. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if Dakota Hudson is cheap in the offseason to say, hey, you can come back and be a part of this competition. You're not guaranteed anything. You might end up in Memphis next year.
Sure.
But if you show us that you want that spot, maybe you get it. Maybe you're a bullpen option for us next year. I'm not so quick to say that I'm completely done with Dakota Hudson.
If he's going to make $2.5 million in the offseason, they want to bring him back. That's fine, because it's not going to really prevent you from doing anything else. And worst case scenario, you option him down to AAA. He's still got options next year. I'm totally fine with that. But if he is the first name that is written in that 5th spot, I think something's gone poorly in your offseason, because Dakota Hudson does not have the kind of upside that I would like to see out of my 5th starter, and frankly, the downside is more significant than what I would like to see from that 5th starter going into next year. So he's the worst of both worlds, right? There's not a whole lot of upside that is instilled with Dakota Hudson, and the bottom can fall out at any moment.
Not enough upside. Look at 2019.
Yeah, it was a different pitcher.
And he still led the majors in walks.
If we're going to talk about 2019, we're also doing the same thing with Jack Flaherty.
We did. Right? And we shipped him off.
Exactly.
Because he was going to cost you too much.
And because, even if he wasn't, I don't know that that's the guy that I want at the front end of my rotation. If I could reasonably say Jack Flaherty was going to be $5 million next year and he was going to be your number 4 starter, I would love to have Jack Flaherty in that spot. But he's not. He was going to cost you $20 million, and he was probably going to slot in as your 1 or 2. Dakota Hudson, it's a very different conversation. It's about the number 5 spot, but the opportunity cost there is what matters. Would I rather have Dakota Hudson in that spot or 55 other pitchers? The answer is the latter. So he gets his next start, and we'll see if he can build on this, but I don't want him being in my rotation next year. In a best case scenario, he's probably either in a middle innings long relief role or pitching for me down in AAA as major league ready depth in my organization. That's how I view him long term, and I think the most likely outcome is that he's non-tendered this offseason, if you want me to be totally honest with you. I think he's going to end up getting a $4 or $5 million arbitration number, and I don't think that he's worth that to the Cardinals.
And that Phoenix will rise from the ashes elsewhere.
Yeah, Kansas City probably, where he'd be number 2 in the rotation. But no, I think you're right. I think right now the plan is not for him to be in any conversation for the 5 starter right now. I think he can kind of pitch his way into that if he continues to build opportunities and looks as good as he did last night. But that's a long road to get just to the point where it's you know what, if we squint, Dakota Hudson can be our number 5. So he's got a tough road to get into that opportunity, even after last night's outing. I think he's probably a non-tender candidate because they're going to have enough depth down in the minor leagues that can fill the 5 if they need to next year. So he's got a long road to do, but I agree with that. I'm not writing him off yet. but it's going to take a lot for him to earn the spot where I say he's a number 5.
Let's talk about it. What does that mean for you guys? Because for me, I'm out. I'm out. I don't think there's nothing he can do for me to go into the offseason expecting Dakota Hudson to be the number 5 starter.
Watch that no-hitter come in the next start.
For you guys, what would it look like? If Dakota Hudson did blank, you two would then write him in as the number 5 starter for the Cardinals in 2024.
I mean, I don't know if there's anything concrete that he would have to do. I think you've put yourself in a position where you don't have a lot of options going into next season for the number 5 spot. Like, I'm not sitting here acting like he's going to come back and be the number 3 next year. You've got 3 or 4 guys that we've named that could be in that competition for the number 5
in
spot.
the entire free agent and trade market.
Great, but I think that entire free agent and trade market is going to cost you more to get a number 5 starter than what you would pay to go to Hudson. And I would much rather spend the extra $10 million it is to get a Jose Quintana on the market. I'd rather put that to a number 1, a Nola or a Snell or a Giolito. I'd rather allocate that money elsewhere.
Why not both?
Because you don't do that. You're not the Mets.
That's thinking right there.
You're not the Mets. If this was Steve Cohen-run organization, I'd say the hell with it. Let's pay
We'd be
5.
rebuilding, let's be honest.
Let's pay
Let me ask this a different way. Clark Schmidt or Dakota Hudson?
I mean, right now, I would say Clark Schmidt.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of the same in terms of what he could potentially provide of what a Hudson can. If Hudson's right,
I think the
they're the same
upside
guy.
is significantly different for
Well,
Clark
I
that's
Schmidt.
just don't think there's not a lot of upside
because
to Schmidt.
you're horned up on Clark Schmidt these days, my man.
I'm not. I think I know exactly what Clark
No,
Schmidt
you are.
is.
You're ready to trade Dylan Carlson for Clark Schmidt.
Yeah, have you seen Dylan Carlson lately? I don't have any regrets about that.
Keith Law tells us
It's a
he's
bad
going to be
example.
great.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Hey, T-Bone mentioned the Mets, or Alex, you mentioned the Mets. And you talked about the money that they're willing to spend and how the Cardinals are not that team. Well, if that's the case, why does everybody nationally seem to believe that the Cardinals are going to contend in 2024 and the Mets are going to take a sizable step back? Why is that? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
ESPN.
We're not looking just for simply like A-ball depth. If we can find talent that we think can help emerge in 2024, that'd be great. 2025, I wouldn't rule that out either, but 2026 seems a long way away.
That was John Mozeliak a few weeks ago talking about how far they're looking into the future at this year's trade deadline. Of course, they ended up acquiring a whole lot of guys that project to at least reach the big leagues at some point in the next calendar year or so. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex, one of the things that's come up over the last couple of days or so after the trade deadline is that it sure seems like the Mets are ready to take a step back. They're going to reset the books, try to get themselves back into contention in 2025 or 2026, and that's when they're really going to push it again, push the pedal back down. Meanwhile, the Cardinals are doing the opposite. The Cardinals are taking a step back right now to really go for it again in 2024, or at least that's what they're saying publicly. Why do you think that is? Why is it that the Mets feel that they need to take this step back while the Cardinals are ready to go for it again in 2024? When the Mets are the team that you expect to spend more money year in and year out.
I would imagine because the Mets are realizing what the Cardinals realized this year, that their minor league system was pretty depleted. And when you spend all of the money on Scherzer and Verlander and Quintana in the offseason and think, well, we'll overload what our major league team looks like and not worried about the minor leagues. Well, when injuries take place, when Max Scherzer can't stay healthy, or when certain guys just aren't living up to the expectations, you have to rely on that minor league system. It is a give and take when it comes to Major League Baseball here. So I would imagine the Mets just realized later what the Cardinals realized this season, like, hey, we're going to have to update this, and we're not competing, so let's make these moves. Seemed like the Mets were trying to accomplish that at the deadline. They just couldn't get it done. So next year might be in terms of taking a step back to say, let's really focus on finding guys that can replenish our system, that can contribute when we're ready to compete. Then we can spend all of the money.
Yeah, I think that is a part of it, and I think that they realize that look, if we're going to be a team that's going to have long-term success, we've got to have more minor league depth than we do right now. But I think the number one thing, and I know teams don't like to say this because it's the classic, oh, we're not paying attention to the rest of the league, we're worried about our own business. I think the Mets look at their division and go, there's no way for us to spend as much money, get better in terms of depth as a whole in our system, and compete in the National League East, because the Braves are just a juggernaut.
Especially if you look at the free agent market this year.
Yeah, like I think the Mets just look at their division and go, man, even if we spend, one, we need to develop young talent in our system, which we were very much lacking. And two, if we spend, the Braves are still a team that, without even making offseason moves and not even knowing what the offseason looks like, I can tell you right now the Braves will go into next year being the favorites in the National League East, compared to the NL Central, where the Cardinals can look at it and go, yeah, shrug emoji, who's going to be the favorite in the NL? We may fix our rotation. We're probably the team that can get back atop the NL Central. So I think the division has a lot to play into this. And I know MLB teams will say, oh, well, we're taking care of our own business. I think Cohen realized, look, we're far off from competing with the Atlanta Braves, and they've got all their guys under contract for years to come.
And it's not just about free agency and spending money. Like, if you don't have the assets in your minor league system that you can trade to get major league ready players, well, you're not going to put yourself above the rest. And that's what the Mets don't have.
I think it's because of young position player talent. Like, I think it's really that simple. Look at the Cardinals, guys that are under the age of 30 next year that could legitimately contribute in a meaningful way in their lineup. Nootbaar, Gorman, Walker, Edman, Carlson, Donovan, Burleson, Herrera, Winn. That's 9 guys that I just mentioned under the age of 30, most of them 25 or under, that are probably going to contribute in a meaningful way next year offensively. Here's the Mets list. Alonso, he's 29 and might not be back next year and is entering an expiring year on his deal. And then it's Beatty, Vientos, and that's pretty much it. They've got one other guy, their catcher, the catching prospect that's up right now.
Alvarez.
That's it. Alvarez. That's it. They've basically got 3 young dudes that are contributing, and 2 of them this year have been so bad offensively that they've spent most of the year at AAA for them. I think that's the biggest reason why there is so much optimism here and so much pessimism in New York. They got old fast, guys. Think about the players that they signed last year to be a part of this winning window for them. It was Eduardo Escobar. It was going out and getting Mark Canha, these really solid complementary pieces. The examples of those players on the Cardinals are all young and cost-controlled. Like the Eduardo Escobar here in St. Louis, is a guy like maybe Alec Burleson, or you could argue Tommy Edman. Their version of Mark Canha is like Brendan Donovan for the Cardinals. They don't really have the equivalent of Nolan Gorman. Maybe you could say he is their equivalent of Pete Alonso, but Gorman's 23 and has 6 years of cost control. Meanwhile, Pete Alonso has 1 year of cost control remaining, and he's about to turn 29. So as much as it is about the money and all of these different things, and like, I understand why there's real pessimism here in St. Louis. The reason why there's optimism about next year is because of how young they are and how cost controlled they are on the position player side of things. Alex, this gets me back to one of the reasons why they got to go for it next year. Set aside the young players for a minute. I thought MLB Network had a great conversation yesterday with Brian Kinney and Dan Plesac on why they believe that the Cardinals should and will legitimately go for it again in 2024.
You get rid of Goldschmidt, you get rid of Arenado.
Oh, yeah.
Who do you hang your hat on to? Where do you hang your hat going into 2024?
Look, if the Cardinals win the division next year, I'm wrong, right? Because they can roll it all back next year. They can win it all. However, you sometimes need to take your foot off the accelerator. If you want to go every year, hey, we're going to have a winning record, you might find yourself in no man's land.
So I think he gets to the right explanation there, but a different conclusion is what I have for the Cardinals from what Brian Kinney just stated there. If you are going to keep Goldie and Arenado, you have chosen your path. You have now decided for the offseason which direction you need to be heading in, Alex. And the Cardinals' plan now needs to be, we have to surround them with the best talent possible. I thought that should have been the plan going into this year. I thought it was a misstep that they didn't surround them with more talent, specifically on the pitching side of things. But that is a lost cause, and that's in the rearview mirror now. Going into next year, that's why you've got to go for it. That's why you've got to trade some of this young talent for legit cost-controlled stud pitching, is because you were able to keep Goldie and Arenado. You replenished your system with the expiring deals, and now it's about going into next season and really trying to win in a meaningful way again.
Yeah, I mean, what you did last year was the equivalent of like when you want to get into a pool and you put your foot in, you say, no, I'm not getting in, it's too cold. And so you back out. Like your foot in the pool was Wilson Contreras. And you said, it's too much money, makes me a little uncomfortable. That was good enough for us and we'll figure it out. What you need to do is you need to cannonball in because you have Goldschmidt and Arenado. They're not getting any younger. Now you have these young pieces that you were hoping can be, and we're seeing this season, can be real contributors to an offense and be one of the best in Major League Baseball.
It's time for you to do what the Rangers did.
Yeah, it's time for you to look at this and say, we've got the talent. Now all we got to do is either spend some of these assets to bring in the actual talent on the pitching side or just go throw money at it. Let's jump right in and make this team competitive with what we have.
Guys, the thing that's really interesting is the Cardinals are not all that dissimilar in the way that they're building from the Rangers. I know nobody really sees it right now because it's hard because of the pitching side of things. But when you look at the position players, Marcus Semien and Corey Seager, your examples of those are Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. The infield, like, staples that are going to be there for years to come that you've paid big money to be a part of that future, the foundation of your future. What the Rangers did last offseason was completely overhaul their pitching staff. They went out and they got high upside starting pitchers that can help them this season. That's what the Cardinals have to now go out there and do. They've got to find their equivalent of Nathan Eovaldi. They've got to find their equivalent of John Gray. They've got to find an upside candidate like an Andrew Heaney. And then, yeah, if you want to, you could go out there and get a legit stud. Now, there is nobody quite like this, but like a Jacob deGrom that, if he's healthy, can change the outcome of your season. Like, that's the Tyler Glasnow move, right? You go out there, you sign him or you trade for him in the Glasnow example, and you hope and pray that he ends up being healthy. But you give yourself the internal candidates for the rotation where if he's not healthy, your season is not completely crumbling because of it, right? That's what the Cardinals need to go into this offseason and do. One of the guys that's going to be in charge of doing exactly that is Michael Girsch. He's the Cardinals general manager. He's going to join us coming up next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Cardinals beat Minnesota last night 7-3, and they're back in action tonight. 6:45 will be first pitch as Sonny Gray gets the start for the Twins. Matthew Liberatore will be on the mound for St. Louis. And coming up next year on BK and Ferrario, Cardinals GM Michael Girsch joins the show. This Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find your road shop 24/7 at londoff.com, londoffAutoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
The real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Happy to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline to be joined by the Cardinals general manager, Michael Girsch. It's been a busy week here in St. Louis. Girsch, Mo, and Randy Flores have all been working hard to get the best deals possible at the trade deadline. Girsch joins us now via the 101 ESPN hotline. Michael, we appreciate the time as always. Let's start with what the last week has been like for you. A lot of Cardinals fans wonder, what is this week like for Michael Girsch, for John Mozeliak, for Randy Flores? So take us inside of that room. How is the work divvied up between the three of you in particular?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a bigger group than just three of us. There's a lot of people who are part of the process, from the scouts out in the field to the analytics guys who produce all the data that we need to make decisions. So it's a big process. Player development, figuring out where guys are going to go and how they're going to fit. So the process really started shortly after the draft ended. We actually, even before the draft, we started making some exploratory phone calls. Moises Rodriguez, Mo, and I each took some teams and made some just basic introductory phone calls before the draft, just to sort of have an idea of where people thought they were going. Obviously, things changed in the last couple weeks of July, depending on how teams play. But it starts early. You start going through teams' prospects and controllable players to identify players that we'd be interested in or guys that would fit for us well, and get second looks on scouting reports where we can, have guys review video where we need to. Flo runs point on a lot of that stuff, and then ultimately we're in a room for the last few days, reacting to phone calls and going through lists and deciding what offers, what counters, and when to be aggressive and when to let the clock run and hope that the other side gets nervous before we do, sort of thing. So it's a lot of moving parts. I've never been part of a deadline like this. This is my 18th season. We've never done anything like this before, so it was a little bit new for all of us, but I hope to never do it again. So,
Michael, I imagine you're like you guys are the kings of multitasking. Like, have you mastered the art of holding three phones with somebody on the other line at once and talking to all three of them?
It's funny. Like, at times it's like really busy, and you really are like you got multiple things going on, especially like the last couple hours of the deadline. And other times it's a lot of sitting around. Like you counter somebody, or you make an offer, or you make an ask. And they either say, well, I'll get back to you, or let me take it to my group or whatever. And then you kind of sit around and stare at each other for a little while and try to think, like, this makes so much sense to us. Why don't they just agree with us? Sort of thing. So.
Our text line's like that a lot, Girsch. They send out a lot of great trade proposals. So whatever you guys don't want and you have, like, the best player in the league, that's typically what our text line sends. So I feel like a lot of teams would be interested in some of those offers.
We'll forward you those proposals, Mike, if you want.
Yeah, I think we're good for now. I think we're good.
So I do want to go back to something you said there about Flores and some of the evaluations that he's had. A lot of the guys that you acquired at this year's trade deadline were parts of recent drafts. So how much do you take into account, some of what the draft rankings were, or what you guys had down as their profiles at that point in time versus what they've been so far down in the minor leagues?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful falling in love with a high school kid that you saw 3 years ago and still holding on to that if what he's done since then has been dramatically different. I think that's something that, on the other hand, if we have information about what kind of kid he is or background or anything else, and he's that can be helpful. So it's sort of a fine line between using information that's old but also having a history on a player. You want to have history. You want to know where he's been and where you think he's going and what kind of player he is and how he's improved. But, just because we liked him in the 2021 or 2020 draft doesn't mean that should have a whole lot of weight in July of 2023.
Michael, Mo talked prior to the deadline about pitching, focusing really on 2024, and we didn't see a whole lot of cost-controlled, major league-ready arms moved at this year's deadline. But how would you classify you and your team's aggressiveness at that deadline of trying to acquire one of those cost-controlled young pitchers?
Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that teams who are competing this year for the playoffs don't want to trade cost-controlled starting pitchers. They need them, and in fact, they need more of them. That's why they're in the market for guys like Flaherty and Montgomery, who are not cost-controlled, right? So, I think the idea that look, last year the Yankees, we were able to identify a team like the Yankees who was competing while we were competing, and we had extra outfielders, and they felt they had depth in starting pitching, and we made a trade for a cost control or a controllable starting pitcher at the deadline with a competitive, a team going for it, and that's just very rare. So. We certainly explored it. We certainly talked to teams, but very few teams are in a position where they have so much starting pitching that they're willing to give you something that is controllable beyond this year while they're trying to win the division or go to the playoffs or win a World Series. So, had discussions, but nothing that really made sense for us, and so we'll revisit those, in the off season when it's a lot more pitchers are available to talk about than they are in July.
That was my follow-up. Does that just counter the discussions and then you revisit them again in the offseason? Does it begin more discussions potentially?
I think there are definitely teams we had discussions with about starting pitching, about controllable starting pitching, about their interest. A lot of teams were interested in our controllable position players. And so we have a better idea now of what teams are excited about which of our controllable position players that, if it makes sense, we'll revisit it in November, and if things change between now and then we'll go in a different direction. But certainly there were some of those discussions might lay the groundwork for off-season discussions.
Michael Girsch is the Cardinals general manager, and he's joining us now on the 101 ESPN hotline here with BK and Ferrario. Girsch, I did want to ask you about some of your own players that you maybe learn about at the deadline as teams are calling or you're calling other teams. How much did you learn about how other teams value your players that maybe even still remain on the roster?
Yeah, I think we have a very good position player group, and the position player group that we have for the rest of the year, all of them are controllable going forward. And I think that was very evident that a lot of teams listed a lot of controllable position players that they were interested in. And I sometimes would say, I don't understand how we have so many guys that everyone's interested in, and yet we're selling. Like, this is not how this year was supposed to go. And most of my peers agreed. They're like, yeah, I don't know how you guys are in this spot, but we like, and then they listed like 6 of our position players or 8 of our position players. And so I think we learned that we're in a good spot on the position player side. And obviously we need to improve our pitching. Obviously we need to do a better job, with base running and defense and one-run games, and all sorts of things have gone wrong this year that we need to clean up going forward, and I have confidence we will. But I do think we're in a really good spot on the position player side in terms of guys who are here, guys who are coming, guys who we control. It's a good spot.
So, Michael, that's the one thing Mo did talk about in the offseason was that the model that the Cardinals have gone about for the last however many years, it's going to be tested this year. And he then said that, yeah, we might have to tweak this model or change this model. How do you view that model being tweaked or changed going into this offseason?
Well, I think we have still 2 months of baseball to see kind of where we stand going into the offseason. So I think sort of having a plan right now that doesn't make a ton of sense. We'll see how some of these guys who get opportunities to pitch to either start or guys who we give opportunities in the bullpen, how they do. We'll just have a better idea where we stand at the end of the season than we do today in terms of our depth and where we are. But we do have to look at our position player group and figure out who we want to bet on and who might make more sense to use as trade bait.
We're talking to Michael Girsch for another few minutes here on 101 ESPN. Girsch, when you look at the players that you were able to acquire at this year's trade deadline, and specifically on the pitching side of things, is it fair to believe that any of those guys will be competing for a legitimate rotation spot by opening day of next year, or is this more depth that can be used at some point next year?
I think, as we sit here today, it's probably unlikely anyone is competing out of spring training for a position for a rotation spot. I think Drew Rahm is the only one who has a lot of pitching experience at AAA. The other guys have mostly been at AA. All of them had a lot of success at AA, and we're sending Roberts and Kloffenstein straight to AAA. So they'll have, whatever it is, 8 or 10 starts at the end of the year here at AAA to sort of see how that goes. But I think this is a group that gets added to guys like Graceffo and McGreevy and puts us in a spot where we have an entire rotation of major league prospects at Memphis going into next year to give us good insurance behind whatever we end up with in the rotation. And you never know. I mean, I don't think if you had asked me a year ago at this time, would Jordan Walker be breaking camp with us, I would have said I highly doubt it. And he had a great finish of the year, great fall league, and a great spring, and things change. So, but I don't think we didn't trade with any of these guys intending to put them in ink as a spot in the rotation.
Michael, you've been with the Cardinals for some time now. Can you remember a time with the Cardinals where this team has had such a long laundry list of things to accomplish in the offseason?
Well, so I would sort of push back on that a little bit. I think our laundry list is actually relatively short. It's pitching. It's starting pitching. Like, we need a couple starting pitchers. We've gone into other years where we've had, this year we needed a catcher. It was obvious, right? And a starting pitcher. And we brought back Waino and signed Wilson, right? And so I don't think we have a longer list. I think it's just a more concentrated list. I think if instead of needing a couple starting pitchers, we needed one starting pitcher and a position player of some sort, it would be a little bit more of a quote unquote normal offseason. But our needs are all on the pitching side, and we'll attack those when we get to the offseason.
How do you attack the bullpen, Girsch, as you look towards the offseason? And I know I'm sure the rest of this season will play into it, but how do you view your bullpen right now with the options that you have, and how important that's going to be to bolster in the offseason as well?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we need right now is to see Ryan Helsley get back on the mound and pitch healthy the rest of the way and pitch well. I think an anchor like that at the back of your bullpen makes a huge difference, and knowing where we stand with Hells before the offseason will be a big part of kind of figuring out what our bullpen needs to look like. But then guys like Gallegos, Palante, Romero, they've all been pitching well. We need them to continue to pitch well and show that they're clearly part of it. And then the rest of the guys that we have who have options and have flexibility and get an opportunity here to see how John King looks and see how the rest of the guys that will be coming up and down throughout the rest of the year, how they can run with their opportunities. I think it's an opportunity for these guys to sort of stake a claim to a bullpen spot in the next 2 months. And some guys kind of already have those claims, and we just need them to keep pitching well and be healthy, and others hopefully can step up.
And that internal competition is always good, Michael, and you're going to get that evaluation from the bullpen. Do you feel like there's still an opportunity to evaluate or compete in terms of outfield positioning, or do you feel like your team kind of has an idea of that outfield and who fits where?
No, I think there's definitely an opportunity there's a couple hundred plate appearances still at each of the three spots plus the DH spot, and between Carlson and Lars and O'Neill and Walker and Burleson, they'll each get plenty of opportunities to sort of continue to establish who they are as big leaguers, and that's part of what we'll learn over the next 2 months.
How do you guys view the future of center field, Michael?
I think we think we have several players who can play center field, and we'll sort of, again, over the next 2 months, see how they all perform to give us a better idea of what the short-term future of center field looks like. I think Dylan and Lars both have shown they can do it. I think Tyler O'Neill has the skills to do it, but I think it just makes more sense to keep him in the left field. And I think, in the longer term, Victor Scott has kind of rocketed up our awareness board, as he had a great year at A-ball and now at AA and stealing bases and getting on base. And he's sort of not in the short term, but in the medium term is sort of pushing his way onto the radar of what center field might look like. You
didn't mention Tommy Edman there. Do you foresee him getting opportunities in center the rest of the way this year as well?
I think at some point this year he might play some outfield. I think we have outfielders who need plate appearances, and so they'll be getting the bulk of the outfield plate appearances. I think the fact that Tommy Edman can be an above-average center fielder and an above-average shortstop makes him incredibly valuable, and makes it so that you can enter a season with some question marks, knowing that Tommy can be plugged into a few different spots. And it's entirely possible, depending on how things go, that when we have the opportunity when it makes sense to bring Masyn Winn up, And when he's ready to get an opportunity in the big leagues, if he runs with it, then that would free Tommy up to compete with that center field job for sure.
And that's my final question. We'll get you out of here on this, and we sincerely appreciate all the time today, Michael. When you look at Masyn Winn and the factors that go into the timeline of calling him up, what are some of those factors that you guys are looking at right now?
I think part of it is Masyn has had a really good couple months in AAA, and he moved quickly through our system. He got to AAA quickly. He scuffled a little bit early in the season, and he is now having real success in AAA. And part of what we want to do is sort of demonstrate he can continue that. Like, having a good couple weeks at AAA is a great step, but the game of baseball is about endurance and repeating the success over and over again. And so before we push him on to his next challenge, we want him to show that he has continued success in AAA, and he's been doing that. And as long as he keeps doing that, I think, there'll be a time – before the end of the season, I think there's very likely to be a time where he gets an opportunity up here. There's no magic thing he needs to do. There's no magic moment. I mean, some of it is just showing that he can sustain that success, in the long term, and then we'll give him a chance to step up here and show what he can do down the stretch.
Michael Girsch is the Cardinals general manager, coming off of a very busy week with the trade deadline now behind him. Michael, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Hopefully we'll talk again soon. Best of luck the rest of the way.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. That's Michael Girsch joining us here on 101 ESPN. Really appreciate him hopping on with us today. Thought there was a lot to get into there. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. We'll get to questions and answers here in just a few minutes. Biggest things note-wise for me that I found to be interesting. Among the pitchers that they traded for at the deadline, said he would not expect any of those guys to be written into pin in their rotation going into opening day of next year. That is noteworthy. On the bullpen, he specifically, when you asked about the laundry list of things that they need to do this offseason, said, hey, we need a couple of starters. Didn't really note the bullpen as big of a need as maybe we would be looking at it on the outside looking in. Said Helsley, Gallegos, Palante, Romero, those were 4 arms that he specifically mentioned as probably factoring into their plans going into next year. That leaves 4 other spots that maybe are up for negotiation right now. And then the other big note that I had, when I asked about center field, he waited and then said Dylan Carlson and Lars Nootbaar, and then said, Tyler can play it, but probably best in left. Did not mention Tommy Edman's name until asked a follow-up question about it. Found that to be a little bit interesting as well, because he was somebody that we had heard about maybe factoring into their long-term plans in center field. So those were my biggest takeaway. Alex, what were yours?
The ones that you had, obviously my bigger takeaway was him saying that the laundry list isn't as big as we think it is, which a little alarming. I understand what he's saying, that it's really only one position and 2 players, but I think there's more to that than just that. The other thing was when we asked him about how aggressive they were at looking for cost-controlled arms at the deadline, and he said, we've called around, and he said, we found out that a lot of teams like our young cost-controlled players.
Which makes sense.
And it sets up the conversations for the offseason, which, if that's where they were accomplishing this, saying like, yeah, we'll touch base again in the offseason, and it seems like they realize now that, look, we're going to have to move some of these arms, or some of these position players, if we want the arms that we deem necessary.
Yeah, I found that to be interesting, and I think we all kind of assumed that was the case. I did find it surprising that he pushed back on the bullpen as being something that they may not have to address necessarily in a aggressive manner. Now, part of that could have been kind of posturing to where, like, teams we already know, like, if we know Major League Baseball knows they need starting pitching.
And there's no getting away with it with a rotation.
Yeah,
everybody else sees what the Cardinals see. So they, like, them saying we need a couple of starters is not news to anybody. They could at least say, hey, we feel like we've got internal options with the bullpen, whether they believe that or not.
And it tells you they're confident with the outfield, too.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of potentially what Girsch was getting to there, because I have a tough time seeing how they can look at the most blown saves in baseball. And I understand what he's saying with Helsley, but Helsley blew a lot of saves, too, while he had opportunities. So I think that was interesting, his thoughts on the bullpen. And I think it was interesting that he did not mention Edman's name in center field. I think their hope is that Carlson or Nootbaar wins kind of that center field job moving forward here in the final, 2 months of the season. And if they don't, and they don't run off with it, and with Nootbaar, I don't necessarily mean his offense. I mean just looking good defensively in center field. Then I think if Winn shows he can play shortstop, then they'll plan on Edman at center field. But I think he's kind of the break glass in case of emergency, starter for center field opening day next year.
Coming up in about 10 minutes or so, we're going to talk to the lead Fangraphs analyst on their prospects list. He is super high on TK Roby, the pitcher that the Cardinals got in return in the Jordan Montgomery deal. He has him as a top 100 prospect in all of Major League Baseball, Alex. So we'll talk to the Fangraphs lead prospects writer coming up in about 15 minutes or so. But coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. If you guys have any questions stemming off of that interview with Michael Girsch, we'll answer them coming up next year on 101 ESPN.
Shield studio on 101 ESPN. You've got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's Questions and Answers on 101 ESPN.
319-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. Just finished up a conversation with Michael Girsch, Cardinals general manager. If you missed it, check it out on the podcast page after the show today. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find that. To recap a few things that he said doesn't expect any of the pitching additions that they made at the deadline to immediately factor into the rotation on opening day of next year. Could at some point next season, but more likely serving as depth to start things out, and then we'll see where things go in 2024. Said that he is a little more confident maybe in their bullpen than other people on the outside are. Mentioned Helsley, Gallegos, Palante, and Romero as factoring into their plans. When asked about center field and what they see as the future out there, brought up Dylan Carlson and Lars Nootbaar, then said Tyler O'Neill can play the position, but probably not ideal. They're going to keep him in left. Did not mention Tommy Edman until asked specifically about him, and said, hey, when Masyn Winn gets back, maybe that's when you'll see him out there a little bit. But reading between the lines a bit, wouldn't expect that that's their primary plan in center field in 2024. That does change a little bit what I had been saying previously. Let's get to some of your guys' questions on the text line. Now, Alex, this one comes from the 314. Do you think that the Cardinals brass believes that this year was just a blip and they are not as worried about the team long term as we are?
I think the Cardinals view that as a blip. I mean, you should view it as a blip if you're a Cardinals team. Like, you have two guys that have MVP candidacy. You have a great offense. You realize that it was a pitching problem and you made the wrong decision. So the blip for the Cardinals team is, okay, we messed up on the pitching. We got to go out there and get more competent starting pitchers for us. And we feel that we accomplished adding pieces to our depth this trade deadline. So, yeah, they view this as this was a bad year and we don't expect to do it again.
Yeah, I think they view it as a blip. I think they view it as, we overvalued what we had in our pitching staff, and now we know we've got to change that model and look for swing and miss stuff and not this pitch to contact the way they've been doing it. Now, where I do find a little alarming is we'll see how their development plan changes with pitching, because they still have a lot of guys in their system, even after the deadline, that are a lot of pitch to contact. That'll be the thing to keep an eye on, and it's a little alarming that they view the bullpen as the way that Michael Girsch seemed to view it in our interview with him. But I think they do view it as a blip, and time will just tell. We'll see what they are next year.
I think they should view it as a blip. I think you have to. Based on what your position players are right now, position players year to year are much more sticky. And what I mean by that is you expect their abilities to kind of remain somewhat status quo, right? You can project pretty well what Aaron Judge is going to do year to year, or what Mike Trout's going to do year to year. It's much more difficult to make that same assessment on pitchers. So if you were built around pitching, it becomes really difficult to project what your next season is, because the gap between the top and the bottom is so much wider. Position players, you kind of have a pretty good idea of what Nolan Arenado is going to do every year. He may have some slumps, but it's going to be 35 home runs, 100 RBIs, and he's going to bat around like 270 plus with an OPS right around 850. Same thing's true for Paul Goldschmidt. I think we're getting to that status now with some of their other position players as well. So you have a pretty good idea of what they're going to be. Now you got to go surround that with the necessary pitching, and that's where they get to the biggest question going into the offseason. From the 314, guys, do you believe that Aaron Nola will be a future Cardinal, yes or no?
I would say no, because I don't think the Cardinals would be willing to meet the necessary requirements to get him. But if he's available and the Cardinals are willing to go to that length, I would say more than likely.
I'm going to say no, because I think he's going to get the kilo on him, and I just don't know how they're going to go in the offseason. I don't think they want to give up their second-round pick again.
Carlos Rodon last year got 6 years and $162 million, so it's $27 per year. I would think Nola will have more value on the market because of his consistency and making a start every fifth day, basically. So let's say it's 6 years at $30 a year, $180 million in total. Do you think the Cardinals, A, would be willing to do that, and B, should meet that asking price? It's two kind of different questions. Should they? Will they?
I think they should.
Yeah, yes, they should. No, they won't.
Will they? They're going to have, for me to ever give them the benefit of the doubt, they're going to have to go do it.
Sure.
And that's the thing, is like, I just haven't seen them do it. And again, I'm one of those that up until like recently has been saying, hey, I've never seen the Cardinals front office react to a season like this because it's never happened. So maybe they do become willing to do it. But until I see that happen, I just can't sit here and say I think they're going to do it.
Yeah, I don't think they will. They are going to have to prove to me that they're willing to spend $30 million and go 5 to 6 years. I think they should. And if it's not Nola, then insert another name here. Blake Snell, Urias, Shohei. Like, you're going to have to go for one of those guys because your team can't afford to miss out on one of those top arms.
I'm starting to think they might. I'll say they won't because of what you guys are saying, the skepticism, but they know they have to adjust their model. They know that. Should they? For Aaron Nola specifically, that's where I actually get a little more squeamish. I don't know, man. I really don't. The conversation that we had earlier this season about Shane Bieber and whether or not he was the right guy for this Cardinals team to bet on long term, it's basically the same conversation to a lesser degree with Aaron Nola. Strikeout stuff is down. Velocity is down. He's a really good pitcher that's going out there every fifth day, but is he about to go through a period where he becomes Miles Mikolas? And if so, is that worth $30 million a year? Because you're not paying for what he was. You're paying for what you project him to be really for the next 4 years, because the last 2 years, whatever, you'll live with it if he ends up being great over the next 4. Can I project him to be great for the next 4 years of his career when we're seeing stuff decline from him? Not to the degree where he's bad. He's not. He's a pretty good pitcher still. But he's pretty similar this year to Miles Mikolas. I don't know, man. I don't know. It is not as much of a slam dunk as I thought it was going to be coming into the season because his numbers are down almost across the board this year. Not in an alarming way, but in a way that is meaningful. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Coming up next, one of the lead Fangraphs writers wrote earlier this week that one of the Cardinals prospects he views as a top 100 prospect in Major League Baseball. He'll tell you who that is and why he's so high on him next here on 101 ESPN.
Catch the Balloon Party with Tim McKernan and Action Jackson. Weekdays on 101 ESPN. where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex, when the Cardinals made a trade at the deadline with the Jordan Montgomery deal that ended up sending him down to Texas, they got back in return TK Roby, a starting pitching prospect that everybody seems reasonably high on, but there was one person in particular that had him ranked higher on his list than others that I had seen, and that was over at Fangraphs. So right now we go out to the 101 ESPN hotline to be joined by Eric Longenhagen. You can read his work over at Fangraphs.com. You can follow him on Twitter at his last name, Longenhagen, Longenhagen. Eric, we appreciate the time, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How's it going? It's a million degrees in the desert still and waiting for that heat to break, but it doesn't seem like it's going to anytime soon, so I'm just sort of cooped up in the house still here after the deadline.
It's actually like reasonably nice here. It's been raining for the last 24 hours, but we'll take it because it cooled things off. So we hope that you get something similar out there in the desert. Eric, I did want to ask you about some of the moves that the Cardinals were able to make at the trade deadline. And let's start with the pitcher that I mentioned, TK Roby. You're really high on him, at least based on the available numbers that we've seen. What makes you so high on TK Roby, the pitcher that the Cardinals got back in the Jordan Montgomery deal?
Yeah, I mean, this was a guy who the Rangers drafted out of high school and gave like just shy of $1 million to. He got like $775K to sign, and that was the 2020 draft. And there's just weird stuff happening as a result of the pandemic. Like some of these guys really broke out on kind of a delay. And in Roby's case, some of that happened because he was injured for a chunk of 2021, and it wasn't really until last season into this season when things really took a leap for him. And before he was shut down with another injury this year, this guy's sitting 94, 95 with huge riding life and a monster breaking ball, like that 2-pitch mix, working the fastball at the letters, and then the curveball off of that is like your modern power pitcher's foundation. And he's always thrown a ton of strikes. Like, he's a little bit undersized. There's a little bit of mechanical violence happening there. I understand why there are some folks who think there's relief risk here. But I think, he's got a mid-rotation starter's 4-pitch mix and a strike-throwing track record that indicates he has an opportunity to hit that ceiling if he can just stay healthy. And so, yeah, I really like this guy. Before he got shut down, we were talking about a guy who was within a stone's throw of the big leagues at AA, and so I think he's got a chance to kick down the door next year, assuming he's healthy and be in the big.
Eric, I know it's hard to do player comps, but when you look at him and when you see how he goes about his pitching, does he remind you of anybody?
Yeah, I mean, he really is, and I make the comp in his scouting write-up on the site, is that he is like a less physical Hunter Brown. He doesn't have that prototypical 6'3", 6'4" workhorse starter body. He's sort of like a skinnier 6'1", but absolutely has that, vertical riding fastball at the top of the zone with the breaking ball that plays really nicely off that as, the foundation of what he's doing. And the changeup I thought had come along enough this year that's a third-plus weapon for him as well. And, yeah, just really has that, like, Houston Astros archetype repertoire and style where, it's all about ripping that fastball past dudes at the letters and everything else plays off of that pitch. And so I thought he's very exciting. He's really the pitcher in that, from the Rangers org who Jack Leiter was supposed to be when he was drafted. It was supposed to look like this. And Roby is like, sort of whizzed past him and is still younger than Leiter. And so I thought, this was a really good get for the Cardinals. And of all the pitchers who moved at the deadline, I thought this, as far as prospects were concerned, that Roby was the most talented one.
Eric Longenhagen is our guest here on 101 ESPN. You can find his work over at Fangraphs. He does great work writing up all of the prospects over there. Eric, when you look at the returns that the Cardinals were able to get, they focused mostly on pitching, as we just talked about there, with Roby being the highest upside player. They also got a couple of infielders in Prito and Sagase? Am I pronouncing? Sagase. Dang it, I was close there. With the infielders that they were able to acquire at the deadline, do either of those guys get you excited about what they could be here in St. Louis?
I think they're both. I guess the distinction that I would draw there is those two guys are players that you can win with, but they're not going to be guys you win because of. They're pieces that fit nicely together, actually. Like, Prieto is not a very good defensive player. He's all about back-to-ball skills. Super difficult to beat in the zone. This is a guy who, broke several Cuban hit streak records, before he defected and came over to the U.S. 2 years ago. Really talented left-handed hitter without a ton of power. He's not a very good defender. He just makes a ton of contact from the left side of the plate. And then Sagase is, right-handed hitting, playing all over the infield right now. Is probably not a big league shortstop. My threshold for, projecting someone as a big league shortstop defender is pretty high. And so I have him more projected second base, third base mix, hitting from the right side. And for how skinny Sagase is, if you walk past that guy on the street, you wouldn't realize that he's a pro baseball player, which isn't sort of a yellow flag for me, I guess. These guys do need to have some amount of overt physical talent for me to really want to project highly on them. But this guy can hit. He's old school, no batting gloves. His hitting hands it's a beautiful swing. The quality of the contact is very precise. So he's, power on contact is surprising for how kind of skinny this guy is in the wrists and the forearms. And on paper, it's big time barrel rate and lift and quality of contact when you're looking at his underlying stat casty, minor league metrics, exciting from that standpoint. So I like both these guys some. I don't think any of them is a plug and play everyday guy, but I do think that they're nice pieces that, especially, in concert together, kind of gives you that Rays type of vibe where you have these dudes platooning and being versatile and moving around, allowing your manager to play matchups within a game.
Eric, going back to the pitching, we talked about Roby and the ceiling for him. The main thing that the Cardinals are searching for 2024 is pitching help, whether it's in the rotation or bullpen. Do you see any of these arms that they acquired yesterday being pieces that could come out of the bullpen potentially next season for the Cardinals?
Yeah, I think between what they got and who is already in the org, that they have a lot of optionable rotation depth. That there's every team every year has so many injuries, especially to their pitching staff, and you just need to have enough bodies around to deal with that. Are any of these guys slam dunk late inning relievers? I don't think so, but I think that as far as having the potential for depth next year, not only is Semro Bursi, who they got from Toronto in the Hicks deal, and Adam Clausen signed as well, came over in that trade. Both those guys are probably going to be put on your 40-man at the end of this season and are likely to debut at some point next year. And then you have the upper-level guys who, you guys know and have heard about, the Gordon Graceffos and stuff of the world, who are also within range. None of these guys is an impact star-level starter. They just have so many guys, Ian Bedell and, even the Cooper Jerpies, who are more polished than they are talented. Any of these guys are within range of the big leagues for next year, but I don't know that any of them is going to, none of them is a rookie of the year candidate or anything like that. So they definitely have more depth on the way than they do star power, but you need that. You absolutely need that to be able to compete. And I think within their division, which is one of the weaker ones in baseball, that they'll be in the mix next year, but they're definitely not light years ahead of the rest of this group.
Eric, the final question that I've got for you is on a prospect that might legitimately compete for that Rookie of the Year consideration next year, and I think that's why we haven't seen him yet, and that's Masyn Winn, the young shortstop that's now down in AAA. He's been tearing the cover off the ball over the last few months, really adjusted nicely in a way that, honestly, I wasn't sure we were going to see from him at that level. What do you project Masyn Winn to be, and what can we expect from him reasonably whenever he does come up, probably in the next few weeks here in St. Louis?
Yeah, I have Winn projected as a plug-and-play, everyday shortstop. I don't think there's going to be, the fact that he's got 16 bombs already this year is kind of surprising to me. I don't think there's quite that much power, like a guy who's who's on pace for like 25 dingers is probably not really what we're looking at there. He's sort of a smaller guy. But the fact that he's the same age as the college kids who just got drafted and has performed the way he has at the upper levels of the minors, and he's obviously very, very talented in some other ways. But yeah, I do think he is the shortstop of the near future. I don't think he's going to be like a Carlos Correa, Bo Bichette type of player, but certainly someone who's going to stabilize that position for the next 5-6 years for the Cardinals. And be in that 10 to 15 range. If we're just lining up all of the shortstops at the big league level over the next 5 years, I do think that Masyn Winn is a top 10, top 15 player at that position who's going to make a ton of contact, do some ridiculous stuff with his arm. There are people in baseball who, especially when Winn was here last fall for the Arizona Fall League, and we all got to look at him for 6 weeks, we're just like, this guy's an unbelievable athlete. I don't know if he's a hitter still. Like, his arm is so tantalizing. The idea that could be on the mound was still interesting to people at that time. But he's proven it at this point. So, yeah, I think he's a slam dunk everyday shortstop here for the next half of the day.
Eric, you study this stuff more than anybody else, so I wanted to ask you one follow-up question here. About 30 seconds left. Is there anybody that we didn't ask you about in the Cardinals system that really gets you excited, that has you dreaming about what they could be? Maybe it's next year, maybe it's 5 years from now.
Gosh, that's a good question. Yeah, the guy who they signed last international period, Reiner Lopez, who's still like 17 and a half as we're sitting here right now, is like a 6'8" projectable righty who, is like a deep, deep projection arm. I really like him. I like Leo Bernal, the teenage catcher who's been in A-ball this year, just really well-rounded, switch-hitting catcher. I think that Bernal is the guy who, in the lower levels of the system is the one who has a chance to be a primary, everyday hitter at a position here within probably going to be a little bit of time just because catchers take a while. But Leo Bernal is the name that Cardinals fans should be following at the bottom of the system.
You can read Eric Longenhagen's work over at Fangraphs.com. Eric, we appreciate the time today, man. You bust your ass over at Fangraphs, and we appreciate you being able to break some of this down for us here on BK and Ferrario.
Thanks for having me, guys, anytime.
You got it. That's Eric Longenhagen joining us here on 101 ESPN. Always appreciate his time.
Guys, Reiner Lopez is 6'9".
Yeah.
And he said, in the piece that I'm looking at right now, says he reminds them of a lot of Sandy Alcantara at that same age.
Oh, we got Sandy back, boys.
Oh, great. We're going to trade him for another mid-level outfielder that can't climb the wall.
That's how they get Mike Trout. 3 years from now, they're trading him for Mike Trout.
Oh, with a back that's basically in a walker?
Yeah, it's fine. He'll be your DH. Dude, you don't have enough of him.
Dude, he's 6'9".
Yeah.
That
also,
sounds like
I don't know how well, I do know how he's 17 years old. He's 196 pounds at 6'9".
Yeah, he's real thin, but he'll be great.
But he's 6'9" and 17 pounds.
That might be like the tallest pitcher in baseball. Because what's that kid from Baltimore? Cano's like what, Cano?
Well, Dylan
Batista, that's who I'm thinking of.
Felix Batista. Dylan Betances, I forgot how to pronounce his name, with the Yankees for the long time. Last year he was with the Mets. Yeah. He was 6'8", and that man was a beast.
Yeah, and Batista's like 6'7", I think.
And what was Andrew Miller? Andrew Miller was 6'7".
Remember last year when the Cardinals faced Batista, and I looked up his baseball reference profile, and it said he was 220 pounds? Yeah. He's now listed at 285. They fixed that for him.
I figured. It's like Jumbo Diaz. You know that guy's bigger than that.
Felix Bautista, by the way, is like the best reliever in all of Major League Baseball.
Oh, you think the Orioles will trade them to the Cardinals?
Probably, yeah.
You give him like 2 years.
I'm surprised they didn't get him for Jack.
Underperforming Cardinals once again.
Looking back to what we heard
from
Eric there, the TK Roby comparison that he made was Hunter Brown, the starting pitcher that they have in the Astros rotation right now. Dude, if he became Hunter Brown next year, I like the amount of quickness with which I would hit the button for that.
Is that better than Clark Schmidt?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got your Clark Schmidt then. Can you stop it with this Clark Schmidt stuff?
I like the chances of him becoming Hunter Brown immediately are pretty slim. So I'm not going to expect that to happen. But if by mid-season next year, Roby is in your rotation or he's at least a spot starter and he shows signs of being that gives you a lot of hope for 25. That really what they did at the deadline, and we said this at the time, guys, it was more about 2025 than it was 2024. You're hoping to hit on one, maybe two of these guys for 2025. And if you do, you feel great about it. Maybe one of those guys is in your rotation, one of them becomes a trade chip, and maybe one or two of them are in your bullpen. Like that's kind of what you're hoping for. That would be a pretty good hit rate from what they've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I think the goal was that these guys would be, if they were going to be quote-unquote contributors in 2024, it was as depth guys. Like, you hope you don't see them unless you have to see them. And then 2025 it is, okay, hopefully they can knock on the door and take somebody's job. Or Michael is, I think, still under contract, Max still under contract. Depending on what you do in free agency this year, you could still have a spot open. You hope that they take somebody's job because, like you said, if Roby becomes Hunter Brown and he's your quote-unquote number 5, yeah, that means you probably got a pretty good rotation.
That's a good problem.
You know how you don't see them in 2024? Actually do something in the offseason and acquire pitchers.
What I'm saying is injury is what I'm saying. Is
but I think there's guys ahead of that where you wouldn't have to worry about that in terms of injuries, right?
I don't know. I mean, Roby probably going to be in AAA. You've got
wouldn't you think Graceffo?
Yeah, but like Roby's like probably a higher. I think he's already higher in the prospect like MLB pipeline than Graceffo.
Knowing how the Cardinals work, they're going to want innings for a AAA pitcher, especially one that's missed a lot of time.
Maybe, but what he's saying is they could just do a spot start here or there. Like if a guy goes on the 10-day IL and you need 2 starts out of that 5th starter spot, could TK Roby get that opportunity over Michael McGreevy if it's mid-year next year? Yeah, he absolutely could, because the upside for TK Roby, it's worth finding out how batters at this level adjust to his stuff. It may end up going really poorly. Remember Matthew Liberatore last year, for example. But I think that's the role that you could see him fill next year, is what Matthew Liberatore was for the Cardinals in 2022. Not what he's been this year, but what he was last year when he got, 5 starts at the big league level? Something like that is probably what you're hoping for next year out of TK Roby. And if he does, it means that he's advanced past some of those guys that we've been talking about for so long. I just don't know what Graceffo or McGreevy are going to be for the Cardinals. This is something that I think is a long-range conversation on how do they project them? Because if you can't really count on them to be starters next year, is it 2 years from now? Is it 3 years from now? How far off are they? I don't know the answer to that. Guy who's very close to the big league level is Masyn Winn. We talked to Michael Girsch about him earlier today. We'll let you hear what he had to say about him next year on 101 ESPN.
Shield Studio on 101 ESPN.
Masyn has had a really good couple months in AAA, and he moved quickly through our system. He got to AAA quickly. He scuffled a little bit early in the season, and he's now having real success in AAA. And part of what we want to do is sort of demonstrate he can continue that. Like, having a good couple weeks at AAA is a great step, but the game of baseball is about endurance and repeating the success over and over again. And so before we push him on to his next challenge, we want him to show that he has continued success in AAA. But before the end of the season, I think there's very likely to be a time where he gets an opportunity up here. There's no magic thing he needs to do. There's no magic moment. I mean, some of it is just showing that he can sustain that success, in the long term.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. That was Michael Girsch on Masyn Winn earlier today. If you missed our conversation with the Cardinals general manager, you can check that out on the podcast page after the show at 101ESPN.com and on the free 101 ESPN app. Alex, I found it interesting what he had to say there because honestly, it just sounds like they're waiting this thing out until his rookie eligibility for 2024 is still going to be in play. I don't think that there's a reason to continue waiting this thing out with him if it's just about performance. Nothing's going to change in the next 2 weeks that makes you feel better about Masyn Winn the rest of the way, not a AAA. What's going to happen that changes between now and the next 2 weeks from now is, does he maintain his rookie eligibility for 2024? And honestly, I don't blame them for doing that. It's smart. I want him to be up right now because I'm an impatient fan, and I just want to watch Masyn Winn right now with the 100-mile-an-hour rocket of an arm that's coming over from shortstop. But if they're saying to themselves, hey, it makes more sense, it's 2 weeks, let's wait it out, let's see what it looks like for the final 6 weeks of the regular season, and we'll get him everyday opportunities at that point, that's fine. But that's, let's be honest, what this is really about, right?
Yeah, of course it is. And again, like you said, I don't blame them for that. I can understand the reasoning that Michael Girsch offered, but to me, I think he's shown the consistency at AAA level to be ready for the major leagues. And if all that's standing in the way of calling him up is a couple of more weeks so you can maintain that rookie of the year status, fine. I mean, it gives you an opportunity to give some shortstop plays at Tommy Edman and Taylor Motter, like, cool, fine. Bring them up, though, because when you do bring them up, I want to see him at shortstop almost every day.
So AAA has had a bigger high offensive output this season in general, so keep that in mind as I'm mentioning these numbers. There's just been a lot of offense that has taken place down at that level. But since May 1st, Alex, this is what Masyn Winn has done offensively for the Redbirds. In 70 games, he's batting .300. He has an OPS of .885. He's hit 11 doubles, 15 home runs, 5 triples, all of this coming in the last 70 games, a per 162 game pace. This is what his offense would stretch out to be, Alex. 25 doubles, 32 home runs, and 110 RBIs.
Jeez.
Again, I want to bring this back in a little bit. You shouldn't expect that to be what he does at the big league level because pitching down there has not been as good as it's going to be what he sees up here at this level. That being said, man, you couldn't have asked for anything more this year out of Masyn Winn, dude. His ability to transition to the AAA level after a really rough start to the season has been nothing short of impressive. So he has earned this opportunity down the stretch that he is very likely going to get. And if it's just going to be another couple of weeks of waiting, and for those wondering why would they want to maintain that rookie eligibility, it's because if he wins Rookie of the Year next year for the Cardinals, because he was a top 100 prospect, they would then be able to get a compensation pick, which, hey man, if you're telling me a 10% chance of winning Rookie of the Year waiting for the next 2 weeks would potentially get me a top 50 pick in next year's draft, it's worth it. It is. It sucks. I hate that it's worth it, but waiting 2 weeks for that kind of makes some sense. I don't think this is about contract status or anything like that. This is just about maintaining that rookie eligibility for the potential draft pick compensation.
Yeah, and though my biggest kind of reason I want Masyn Winn up here is I want him to see how Major League Baseball pitching kind of pitches him so he knows what to work on in the offseason, that doesn't change waiting another 2 weeks. Like, he's still going to have an idea of how teams approach him in that adjustment period. He may come up here, and because there's not a whole lot, I mean, there's still a ton of scouting reports on him, but he may come up here and have a 2 week hot stretch before Major League Baseball truly adjusts to him. But that that's still going to be plenty of time for him to see what the adjustment is and how teams are getting him out and what he needs to work on in the offseason. So I understand the Cardinals playing it out. I am just the impatient fan, just like you, to where it's I want to see him because, let's be honest, there's not a lot of excitement watching the Cardinals right now. So the more prospects, the more guys that I can see that they've talked about in years, the more exciting it is to try and watch them play, and Wynn's one of those guys for sure.
Apparently, if they get second or third in Rookie of the Year voting, they get the team a international pick.
There you go. A little bit more bonus money or
the
something
Cardinals,
like that.
they love their international bonus money.
It makes sense. I really do understand why they're playing it this way. Again, it's frustrating, but I get what they're trying to accomplish there by waiting it out a little bit. Somebody on the text line said, can we not overestimate what he's going to be and try to make him out to be the next Albert Pujols the way that we have done the last 20 prospects?
Not the Albert Pujols, but the next Francisco Lindor.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. If he becomes next year what C.J. Abrams has been this year for the Washington Nationals, I think you'd consider that to be a success. C.J. Abrams this year with the Nationals has 10 home runs. He has an OPS plus about 5% below league average. He's basically been a slightly better slugging percentage version of Tommy Edman at the plate. But he's stolen 25 bags. He's driven in about 40 RBIs, and he's not striking out a ton. I think that's kind of what you should expect next year out of Masyn Winn offensively. Slightly below league average, looks awesome defensively, so that's one place where he does separate himself a little bit from Abrams. I think he's going to be better defensively than what C.J. Abrams has been for the Nationals. And if you become that, I think that's pretty good. As a rookie-level player at the age of, 21 years or 22 years old next year, man, that's a really nice season.
This has nothing to do with the expectations being too high for him by the time he gets up here next year, and everything to do with give me a competent rookie to play a premier position and make my team competitive, so I can spend the money that I would be spending on that position elsewhere. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not spending the money on Paul DeJong right now. I'm spending it on a pitcher because Masyn Winn is making me competitive.
And one of the other positions that you could be doing something similar with is center field. How do the Cardinals plan to position themselves in center field next year? The rest of this season could have a big explanation as to what that'll look like next year. We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Breaking news.
Alongside Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley. We got to tell you about our friends over at Apache Village RV Center. Alex, from the moment that we walked through the door, they treated us as if we were family over at Apache Village RV Center. Super easy to find them. Go on 270, you get off in Hazelwood, you will find their massive lot. And anything you're looking for, they've got it for you over at Apache Village RV Center. Whether it's just a trailer, you want to get started there, or if you're already a part of the RV community and you're saying, you know what, I want to get myself the full-blown, state-of-the-art, newest version of a motorhome. Well, they've got that out there for you on their lot as well. It's at Apache Village RV Center.
Look, I've already got my wife excited about wanting to get into the RV game right now, especially when it comes to traveling vacations, whether we're driving up to Michigan or driving to Disney World. Rather than deal with the flights and deal with the pain of traveling, you just get in your RV and you head that way. Here's the thing about it, too. The financing options, they've got them for you. So if you feel like, well, I just can't afford it right now, Apache Village RV is going to help you get into whatever works best for your family. They'll make you feel like family. You'll love your experience out at Apache Village RV Center. Go one better. Go Apache Village RV Center.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Cardinals beat Minnesota last night 7-3, and the rubber match of the three-game set is tonight. 6:45 will be first pitch as Sonny Gray gets the start for Minnesota. Matthew Liberatore will be on the mound for the St. Louis Cardinals, and Jack Flaherty, who was dealt to the Baltimore Orioles at the MLB trade deadline, will make his Baltimore debut today as he takes on the Toronto Blue Jays. And tonight here on 101 ESPN, we've got the Hall of Fame game for you as the NFL is back as the Cleveland Browns take on the New York Jets, and we'll have pregame coverage starting at 6:30. This Sports Center update was run by Johnny Londoff. Find your road shop 24/7 at Londoff.com, LondoffAutoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Guys, I want to have a conversation about what the Cardinals are going to do in center field. Because when you look at what they have available to them right now, they've got a lot of guys that can play center field. Lars Nootbaar can play out there. Dylan Carlson can play out there. Tommy Edman can play out there. Technically, I guess you could say that Tyler O'Neill could play out there, but I would prefer not to go down that path again.
He's got, quote, the skill set.
As long as he doesn't dog it.
It's a lot of players that are having the capability to go do it, but not a whole lot of players that really projects to ideally play in center field. So earlier today, we asked that question of Michael Girsch. What does the future of center field look like here in St. Louis? Here's what he had to say.
We think we have several players who can play center field, and we'll sort of, again, over the next 2 months, see how they all perform to give us a better idea of what the short-term future of center field looks like. I think Dylan and Lars both have shown they can do it. I think Tyler O'Neill has the skills to do it, but I think it just makes more sense to keep him in the left field. And I think, in the longer term, Victor Scott has kind of rocketed up our awareness board.
So Victor Scott is a couple of years away. That's more like 2025 that we're talking about there. For next year, Alex, if they're going with internal options, I find it interesting that he did not mention Tommy Edman there as a potential center fielder for them. He didn't mention him until
maybe he just
after
forgot.
We talked about it with him. I think he's got a pretty good idea of who his options are out there.
Edman's been hurt for a while.
He talked about Lars Nootbaar and Dylan Carlson as two players that are likely to get opportunities out there in center field. I think that's what you should be doing the rest of the way. Just finding out what those guys look like in center field. And honestly, I think the majority of the time I would be giving to Lars Nootbaar. I know I'm going to get crushed on the text line for this because everybody suddenly loves Dylan Carlson.
Yeah, he's so young.
After last year, everybody said, how could you possibly keep him in a Juan Soto deal? Like, okay, fine. We've flip-flopped there, except we're the ones that get called out for it. I'll do it to you guys. Text line.
That felt a little passive-aggressive.
Yeah,
there was no passiveness about that.
Squirt him.
Ridiculous. Come on.
Dylan Carlson, guys, this year,
Unbelievable.
he's batting .225 on the season with a slugging percentage for the second straight year below 400. It's not what you want as an everyday player. Meanwhile, Lars Nootbaar, guys, I'm ready to have the conversation about if this guy over here, T-Bone, was just flat out wrong on Newt. Last night hits another home run. The power is starting to come around. You look at the numbers on the season. He's now batting .280.
Could have showed up in August.
Getting on base 38% of the time. He's slugging .450. And if you look at his numbers overall, he's basically right now putting up prime Ben Zobrist numbers. Which Ben Zobrist, while not a superstar, was a guy that you could win with batting in the top 4 of your order every single season for the entirety of his prime. Did it with the Rays, did it with the Royals, did it with the Cubs. So when you look at what Lars Nootbaar is right now, Alex, let's focus on the offensive production and then we can talk about his defense. Is he a guy that you could foresee as an everyday center fielder for the Cardinals next year offensively?
Sure. I don't see why not. He's shown it. And, I mean, frankly, you've got a lot of pop elsewhere that I'm not worried if Lars Nootbaar doesn't provide the pop. Now, he's got the on base, which there are a lot of guys that don't have that for the Cardinals, and I think that's a specific set of skills. His defense has shown you that he can handle it, but offensively, yeah, I'd be fine putting him out there every day as my center fielder.
Yeah, I don't mind putting Newport out there every day as the center fielder. I think long-term he projects in a corner, but I think they're going to view next year in center field like they did with shortstop this year. Honestly, the last 2 years, where it is, we've got the guy internally that's going to take this job at some point, and Victor Scott, like in shortstop, it's Masyn Winn. We'll just kind of plug and play right now till we get to that point. Because you said Victor Scott probably 2025. I think you're right on. I think they're going to go into 24 with kind of just a guy that Nootbaar, Edman, Carlson, one of those guys is the starting center fielder, and he's only going to be there for a year, and they can just get by with it until Victor Scott is ready. But yeah, I think Nootbaar's a guy that can play center field for you. I think he's average, slightly above average out there in center, but he's got the arm to play center field too, which is another thing that I personally want in a center fielder, someone that's got an arm to help try and cut down runners at the plate or when they try to tag up on fly balls. But I think he can play in center. I think he just projects better in the corners more than likely in 25.
Do you guys like Randy Arozarena?
Yes.
What kind of stupid question is that?
What a lead-in question.
Do you guys like offense and home runs and a good defender? No. I don't want that. Give me Dylan Carlson.
Can I give you a comparison of Randy Arozarena and Lars Nootbaar since the start of last season?
No, you can't, because I'm not buying that.
Why?
What a lead-in.
I'm just not buying it. But
Lars
go ahead.
Nootbaar, since the start of last season,
Sell it to us.
has an OPS of 807. Randy Arozarena, since the start of last season, has an OPS of 782. Lars Nootbaar has a higher on-base percentage and a higher slugging percentage in that stretch of time than Randy Arozarena does. Guys, Lars Nootbaar's a really freaking good baseball player. Really good.
Randy Arozarena's also done it for 3 total seasons.
Yeah, and Lars Nootbaar needs to continue doing this, but he's only been in the big leagues for the last couple of seasons. So this is the entirety of our sample size that we have to offer with Lars Nootbaar. And since he has been up last year, he has been a really good hitter at the major league level. He is now walking over the last 2 seasons 14% of the time. He's getting on base in that stretch at a 360 clip. You guys remember Brandon Nimmo, right? We talked about him all last offseason as, hey, you probably don't pay significant money for on-base percentage, but if you needed a legit center fielder that does have that on base and you wanted a lefty bat, man, Brandon Nimmo feels like a really good fit. He ended up getting $20 million a year. He is basically the equivalent of Lars Nootbaar. You have Brandon Nimmo. His name is Lars Nootbaar, and you're paying him nothing for next season. Lars Nootbaar has been treated by the organization as a franchise staple, a guy that they are putting in pin along with Jordan Walker in the outfield for next year.
How'd that work out the last time they did it with a young outfielder that was supposed to be a mainstay?
None of them had this kind of profile. None of them had this kind of production. Nobody.
Dylan Carlson had this profile.
Absolutely not.
Dylan Carlson was said to supposed to be this way.
Yeah, but he didn't produce.
Yeah, he didn't have the
I get it, but what you're saying is the profile or the expectation.
Forget the expectations. We are now on to production. This is no longer about potential with Lars Nootbaar.
For a full year.
I mean, over the last 2 seasons now, if you're looking at just his major league playing time, it's 700 plate appearances. So yes, that is more than a full seasons of results now that we have seen from Lars Nootbaar. And in that stretch of time, he has produced in a way that, who's the best outfielder production-wise that we've seen since Matt Holliday? I think it might be Lars Nootbaar. So when we talk about what the outfield looks like next year, this is a guy that should be the number 1 option for you because he's good defensively. He can play in center field if you need him to. And offensively, he is producing in a way that the Cardinals expected him to. He has done what Carlson never did, which is sustain it for more than 1 season. He has done what O'Neill never did, what my guy Harrison Bader never did. This is finally a player that the Cardinals bet on, and it's weird to me that it's almost gone in the other direction of the other players. People are praising Dylan Carlson while pushing down Lars Nootbaar when Carlson is all about projection. And Nootbaar is about production. This guy's actually doing it on the baseball field. We're finally seeing the lefty bat that gets on base at a high clip and is starting to show the power as well. And he's 25 years old. This is what they've been missing. And for some reason, when I try to prop him up, and I'm not talking about just you two, to be clear here.
Feels very targeted.
I feel like there's some fans that are doing the same thing. Guys, this is the guy that we've been waiting for. This is the prince that has been promised. It is finally arriving.
Oh, my God.
And we're kissing it, and we're becoming the toad. And I don't understand. I just don't get it.
I don't know if he was the prince that was promised. I think he was the toad that was kissed. I was like, holy bleep, this is a prince. Because he wasn't a prospect. That's
the
where
prince I was promised was
there.
Dylan Carlson, and I got the toad.
But no, I think you're right. I think you plan on him and kind of pencil in what you think his production is next year. The whole thing where I always have been pushing back on Nootbaar recently is because, yes, look, right now he is a everyday major league outfielder. The part that I push back on, especially right before the trade deadline, was he is not in an untouchable list for me.
That's fair.
And that's where my biggest pushback is, mostly because of where the Cardinals sit. I think going in it next year, planning on him being the center fielder or left fielder, depending what happens with this outfield going into 2024, I think that's the right approach from the Cardinals. But I wouldn't just hang up the phone when it is, okay, well, if you want Logan Gilbert, Lars Nootbaar's got to come back in the package. I'm not just hanging up the phone. I'm trying to avoid trading Lars Nootbaar. But if it comes down to it, it's either Nootbaar and you either keep Nootbaar or you get Gilbert and we get Nootbaar, then I'm open to that conversation. And that's where my biggest pushback is on Lars Nootbaar. I don't think he should be in an untouchable conversation. I think he's in that second tier of untouchables, but that's not a complete untouchable player.
Texter troll. I'm asking this in all seriousness because I don't even know what to say anymore to these people. BK, you're drunk. Nude is okay, but he is certainly not better than Dylan Carlson.
That's got to be troll.
I'm just trying to figure out who you're trying to convince for this segment, but now I know this texter.
I'm genuinely asking. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. If you could keep one of Carlson or Nootbaar, who are you keeping?
Put it up on our YouTube poll. Why don't we?
Yeah, go over on YouTube at 101 ESPN STL. 101 ESPN STL.
Take two.
Who would you rather have on the Cardinals next year, Dylan Carlson or Lars Nootbaar? You could only keep one.
I mean, to me, that's just an insane question. It's an obvious answer. You take the guy who has
been good,
had the label of, I'm not going to let him go unless you pry him from my cold, dead hands.
Coming up next, we're diving into the junk drawer here on 101 ESPN.
Open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trust wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Let's dive into the junk drawer. Alex, I've got a question for you. T-Bone, you could sit this one out if you don't mind.
I've got a question before you start. Have you calmed down?
I have. I think I'm better now.
Because I felt like you were screaming at both Tanner and
My wife knows this about me. I need like 5 minutes. You give me 5 minutes, I'll be okay.
Damn, that's good.
I get emotional sometimes. I get out in front of my skis.
She sent you to timeout.
You give me about 5 minutes.
I send myself to timeout these days. I'm like, hey, I need 15. I'm surprised you only need 5.
You give me 5, I'll go sit down, I'll be in my own thoughts for a moment, and I'll be like, you know what, that was stupid. I was being mean. But I don't feel bad about the last segment.
It'll
All
grow.
you Dylan Carlson people out there, you guys are ridiculous.
All right, go take your 5 minutes.
It'll go in incremental time. Like 5 minutes now, in about a month, it'll be 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You'll get to an hour.
The more sleep deprived I am, the longer that stretch becomes.
You'll get to the point where Kara's like, why were you in the bathroom for 2.5 hours? I'm like, I was in there for 2.5 hours?
So, reason why I wanted to ask you, Alex, my wife and I are going on our first date tonight since baby Luca came around. What is dating like as you have a child in this world?
Oh, boy, you asked the greatest question ever. I'll give you a great picture of it. It's going to dinner, sitting in silence in the car ride to dinner, and then when you get to dinner, talk about your kid.
Okay.
Talk about cute things he does.
Okay.
Then sit in silence for another 15, 20 minutes. Not because you don't want to be with each other, because you're both so freaking exhausted and it's nice to not have a kid around. And then when you get home, you go to sleep.
I thought maybe there's even like a moment where you guys both just take a nap in the car before going home.
You know what? Katie and I have done it before.
Longer,
Katie and I have fallen asleep in the car waiting for our table to be called at the restaurant.
Are you serious? Really?
They said we'll text you in the comment. It'll be like 30 minutes. And I'm like, all right, let's just go sit in the car. And the next thing you know, the seats are reclined and you're asleep.
What's the...
You end up having Taco Bell for dinner instead.
Yeah, I was about to
you
say,
wake up and the table was gone. You're like, son of a...
When you guys are going out for date nights, what's the go-to?
For us?
Is there like a spot that you... Maybe it used to be your favorite, and now you're able to go back to it now without the kids.
Oh yeah, it's always on the hill. It's either Pietro's or Favazza's. Like Favazza's was Katie and I's spots. Like Friday nights, we would go to Favazza's on the hill, and then when you have kids, like it's not easy to go to fine dining Italian restaurant and bring 2 kids that'll scream the entire time and throw their food. So I mean, we've gone with them, but we kind of pump the brakes on it a little bit, so something like that. But really, all we do for date nights is we go out to dinner, because if we've got the babysitter gets the girls to sleep. By the time we get home from dinner, then we can watch a movie or something. That's kind of what our date nights typically are.
There's a new Peruvian / ceviche spot in St. Charles called Jalea, and we were not able to get it while she was pregnant because it's ceviche, which is uncooked fish, basically. So that's what we're going with tonight. I will report back with you on how this goes.
Is she excited?
I hope I hear a story about somebody falling asleep in the car.
I'm telling you, dude, the car ride. The first time Katie and I went on a date after we had Adelaide, our first one, we were driving, and like typically my wife and I are chatty Cathys, which no surprise here. Like we're always talking with each other, updating each other. And that drive, it was like a 20-minute drive to a restaurant. And when we got there, I'm like, man, is she pissed off at me? What did I do? And the next thing I find out, she's like, I'm exhausted. And that's when we had fallen asleep in the car waiting for the table.
I half expect there to story to be tomorrow where BK's like, yeah, I was driving us to our date night and Kara fell asleep in the passenger seat, and I go, oh, she was tired. No, I kept talking about Newt Bar over Carlson and I bored her to sleep.
Yeah, Kara's like, I'm never going on a date night again with him. He's like, I just don't understand, Carol, why they think Carlson is a better outfielder. Newt Bar can play better defense.
Sometimes I do have to catch myself. I realize my wife doesn't care about any of this. And it's part of why we work, right? Kara loves musicals and Disney. I love sports and politics. Those are like 2 of my passions.
God, he just described my relationship with my wife.
And so it's like,
I need to...
There's a lot of yin and yang there, right? So when I get home, when I talk to Kara, there's not a whole lot of talk about sports, but I do sometimes revert back into my own habitat where I'm like explaining to her something that she clearly has no interest in whatsoever. You can see the eyes glazing over. It's like when I talk to Alex sometimes. how I can feel it on the show where his eyes start glazing over. You can see like,
where's the squirt bottle?
I've lost him.
What a
I've lost my wife.
What'd you say?
Well played, sir. Well
Wasn't
played.
listening.
Unbelievable.
Coming up next. So, I want to make this very clear. This was pre-planned.
Yeah.
This was on the rundown before our last segment.
I guess we're calling back to Dylan Carlson, aren't we? BK.
Just going to read you what's on the rundown.
Yeah, because who did that rundown?
What happens if Dylan Carlson doesn't add value to the Cardinals down the stretch? T-Bone will tell you next.
Alex Ferrario and the 101 crew will be at the listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
All right, here we go again. It's a Dylan Carlson segment here on BK and Ferrario. You guys know the
Better
routine.
known as BK issues on anybody not named Lars Nootbaar.
Not exactly. T-Bone's going to do all of the hard work for me here. That's Alex Ferrario, that's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. So the Cardinals are hoping to extract some value from Dylan Carlson, right? That's the goal. They didn't trade him at the deadline. I think for two reasons. This is speculation, but it's my assumption. One, teams didn't value him the way that they probably would if he was fully healthy and producing the way that the Cardinals expected him to. That makes sense. I understand it. Two, teams were unwilling to give up major league pitching right now because teams that have that pitching are probably contending. So you can't get the pitching you're looking for. Dylan Carlson doesn't have the value that you were hoping that he would have, and you add all of that up. You don't trade him at the deadline. You hope over the next 2 months he turns around his season. He is healthy. He gets an opportunity. Now he ends up being traded in the offseason for that pitching that you're looking for. Or he plays so well because he's healthy and getting that opportunity, he works his way into your plans for next season as your starting center fielder. All of which is possible. Maybe unlikely, though. T-Bone, what happens if Dylan Carlson doesn't regain his value? Because right now, he's batting .225 on the season, and he's got an OPS of .660. Dating back to the start of last season, and this is no longer a small sample size, 700 plate appearances. He has an OPS of .685. He is slugging .365 in that stretch.
Run it back! Run it back!
No. Okay. No. You should sell.
What happens?
You should sell low on Carlson if that's what happens. And honestly, he probably even becomes a throw-in any kind of trade package. You cannot run it back with Dylan Carlson if he doesn't recoup value.
Speak for yourself.
They're running out of spots. They need to clear up the logjam in the outfield. If they said going into next year our outfield is basically the same thing that we had this year, then something went awry, and they made a mistake in the offseason. I think Carlson, even if he doesn't recoup his value completely, I don't think you're selling so low you're getting just cash for him. I think somebody will still value him. You're probably just not going to get the piece back in return that you would hope for based on the way you projected him to be. But they will have to sell low on him if he cannot recoup value, because I think he's right now even lost the fourth outfield spot. I think that belongs to Alec Burleson. I think Burleson has shown he can be a capable fourth outfielder off the bench. And like lately, he got the start last night, and you saw why the Cardinals like him. You know why? Because he can hit right-handed pitching because he deposited a ball into the right field seat. So I think Carlson right now is fifth on the depth chart among outfielders, and I think they're going to continue to get him playing time. But if he doesn't start showcasing against righties and doesn't start to recoup value, they are going to have a serious conversation of, yeah, we can't really run this back because we've got a logjam here in the outfield, and we need to make this easier on Ollie Marmol. I thought it was too difficult for him early in the year balancing playing time. I think they're going to have to look at Carlson and go, you know what? It just didn't work here in St. Louis. Let's sell low and still gain some assets back in return.
Here's my question. How do you plan to recoup value? Because he's not going to be playing every day. Nootbaar, O'Neill, and Walker are going to be playing every day.
I think
they're doing like a 4 guys for 3 spots type of a thing.
But that's
where
what
one
I'm
guy's
saying.
rotating. They'll get, I mean, what is there, 55 games remaining?
Yeah.
Each of these guys will play like 40 games, 45
I understand that, but what I'm saying is if you're trying to recoup value with him, I would imagine you want to get some repetition in there for Dylan Carlson to where you see it for 7, 8, 9, 10 days where you just put him out there every day as the outfielder. But
do you feel any differently if like in that 10-game stretch he's played 8 games?
Do I? No, but I would imagine other teams want to see like, okay, yeah, you've been awful for this stretch. Let's see what this looks like when you're in right field for 3 straight days or you're in center field for 5 straight days. And I don't see that happening for the Cardinals. The only reason I'm asking this is because I don't see you being able to recoup value for Dylan Carlson. I think the value is the value right now. And that's why I'm trading him no matter what, so I can clear this logjam. And to what Tanner said, he's a part of a package. He's not going to be, I'm just trading him elsewhere to get something in return. When I put together my package to get this starting pitcher in the offseason, Dylan Carlson's a throw-in in that deal.
So here's why the Dylan Carlson conversation has to happen for the Cardinals, and why I understand the frustration on our text line, but this is basically the equivalent to what I was saying last year about Barbie, where I became the villain because I said the Blues should probably trade Ivan Barbashev coming off of what was an unbelievable season by him. We can acknowledge the value of a player while also taking into account what the team's situation is and how that player fits into their long-term plans. That's what you have to do as a team when you're looking at this stuff. Dylan Carlson right now, when you look at what he's done against right-handed pitching since he came up to the big leagues, it's awful, guys. I mean, like, one of the worst hitters against right-handed pitching in the big leagues in that stretch. He's getting on base 30% of the time and slugging against right-handed pitching .370. To put that in perspective, there are only 130 players that have at least 1,000 at-bats against right-handed pitching since Carlson got the call-up. Carlson ranks 115th among them in slugging percentage against right-handed pitching. If you want to go OPS, it's basically the exact same. He has been horrible in those spots. I don't know if that's going to change. In fact, I don't know how it does change. I would expect that this is kind of who he is, which is a platoon bat in the outfield, that you love starting him against left-handed pitching. But that means you're starting him once every 3 days at best in the big leagues right now. And then he's coming off of the bench or as a defensive replacement in most other games. I don't think this team can have both Dylan Carlson and Tommy Edman on it because they're basically the same player. They project to play center field in a good scenario in the outfield, and both of them really struggle against righties while playing well against lefties. So pick who you would rather have out of those two players. I think the guy that has more value elsewhere is Dylan Carlson because there is still that upside baked into him. He's still very young, switch hitter, can play anywhere in the outfield. And while I'm lower on him than most, I can see how he would be an average starter for a lot of teams that don't have the same outfield depth that the Cardinals do. Meanwhile, Tommy Edman, I think, has more value to the Cardinals than he does elsewhere. He gives you a fail-safe in case things go poorly next year with Masyn Winn. He gets off to a sluggish start at shortstop. He also gives you the opportunity where if Nootbaar goes through injuries next year or just isn't as good defensively as you're hoping for, he can play center field for you in a pinch next year as well. That guy, to me, I'm keeping. Dylan Carlson would be the one that I'm looking to move going into the offseason. So for me, I think I'm with you, Alex. No matter what happens the rest of the way, he's the guy that I'm looking to trade going into the offseason because he has value and because for me, he doesn't have that much value right now.
Can I add in another area that I don't hear people talk as much about in terms of clearing up the logjam that needs to be done by this team, which, again, it's another laundry list for this team to figure out. You need to figure out what you're doing at DH. You got like 5 guys right now who are also DH hitters for you, and to me, you can't do that. Like, if Alec Burleson is a DH for you and a fourth outfielder, great. Then let's start eliminating some of these. If you're going to carry 3 catchers next year because Wilson Contreras isn't a catcher to you, well, then you're going to have to trade Alec Burleson or something like that because how this team utilizes Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, where they're off their feet every 4th or 5th day, you can't keep doing this where you got all of these roster players and nobody playing because they're sitting on the bench because you have too many guys who can't play their position well enough, and so you just view that as a DH.
So who would you say fits into that criteria?
Alec Burleson fits into that criteria. Wilson Contreras fits into that criteria. I know you're not trading him, but you need to figure out if he's a catcher or not for you. And frankly, this glut of infielders where it's Donovan and it's Gorman and it's Edman and it's going to be Masyn Winn. And with the Donovan news of his surgery, correct me if I'm wrong, this is kind of like the Bryce Harper thing, right? Where you can still hit, so it's not the same thing.
Harper had Tommy John. There was an update yesterday on the specific surgery that Donovan is going to get. It sounds like this is something that he should be good to go on all
so he's
fronts
100%
going into spring training.
Gotcha.
That's their expectation. Now, that could change. Obviously, we know, this stuff can change like that, and then maybe next year we get to spring training and they're saying, hey, he's on a no-throw program. We're like, okay, cool. We know how this is going to end up going. But as of now, their expectation is that Donovan should be good to go in all facets going into next year.
I mean, because I was wondering if he was going to have to start the season as a DH because you couldn't use him in the infield. But you've got like 4 guys, and I'm not even including 3 or 4 other names that are on the 40-man roster that you're not using, and Luke and Baker and Moises Gomez and Juan Yepez.
See, none of those guys to me fit into the Cardinals' plans next year. Well, then, and so, I would be trading them, but not because of the DH situation, instead because of the roster spot. I think that roster spot is more valuable than a lot of those players that you mentioned.
But I feel like they're holding on to them because of the DH opportunities.
I don't even know that they're holding on
Juan
to
Yepez is on the 40-man roster because if somebody goes down, we could bring him up and he could be a DH option for us.
I think he's on the 40-man roster because there's nothing really else that you can do right now. I think this offseason that changes. If he's still on the 40-man roster going into next year and they don't have a plan for him at the major league level, then I'm willing to ask some serious questions on what the Cardinals did or really didn't accomplish going into the offseason. Same thing for Moises Gomez. These are the types of guys that typically, this is the Adolis Garcia situation, right? I'm not saying it's going to become that, but this is why the Cardinals ended up not having Adolis Garcia on their 40-man rosters because they just didn't view a future for him in St. Louis because they had so many other options. the same thing could end up being true for a guy like Juan Yepez, where you probably end up trading him elsewhere. I don't know what you'll get in return right now. His value's not very high. You should have done it last year probably if you were going to try to get something for him. But maybe you can get a lottery ticket guy that ends up maybe becoming the next Juan Yepez. That's what they need to do going into the offseason. But I think for me, it's really about the outfield. Because if you solve this outfield mix, specifically with Dylan Carlson being like the primary guy that I would be looking to move, I think then there's a trickle-down effect where everything else becomes a little easier to figure out. With Alec Burleson, you mentioned him in that DH mix. I think we know what his role is, guys. He's a fourth outfielder that can occasionally start for you as a DH against right-handed pitching. I don't think that's a problem. I think we get into such a rush of, well, where's this guy going to play every day? Some guys aren't everyday players. Maybe Alec Burleson is never going to be an everyday player for the Cardinals, and that's okay. He's just going to be a cheap, cost-controlled, really solid left-handed bat coming off of the bench, so the Cardinals don't have to pay Corey Dickerson to be that guy.
Yeah.
They don't have to go out and get Brad Miller to be that guy. He can play first base whenever Goldie's off. He can occasionally DH for you. He can play in the outfield if you need him to against a right-handed pitcher. You have some injuries out there. He's a really valuable commodity for the Cardinals. And we've seen when he's in there, there is upside in that bat as well. So I would keep Alec Burleson, barring something unforeseen this offseason.
Yeah, I would too, and I don't mind him being a fourth outfielder. This is the conversation we had with Luke and Baker, Juan Yepez earlier in the year, where it was, okay, why are these guys not up with Taylor Motter, who has to be in the bench role? Because the Cardinals were claiming they want those guys to get everyday opportunities. Well, some guys aren't going to have major league careers doing that. And Mo has even said in the past, to your point on the signing of Corey Dickerson, where it is, yeah, it's a lot harder to convince veterans on the market to come and be on the bench than it is to just have young guys doing it. And I think the way Burleson's bat profiles, he's like the perfect DH that you want, to where it is not so much by looking at the numbers, but the fact that he makes contact a lot. He's not a big strikeout guy. He makes a ton of contact when he's up there at the plate. Yep. He reminds me kind of like what, and I don't think Descalso was this, but he kind of reminds me in terms of contact Descalso. Descalso wasn't going to be a guy that was going to hit for power, but you knew you're going to get a quality at-bat every time you brought him off the bench. Same with Greg Garcia when he was a guy that would come off the bench. Burleson reminds me of that, but he's got higher upside, I think, with his bat, because I think he definitely has more power than those two. But you know, every time that you pinch hit with him, or you throw him into spot start in the outfield, or spot start at first base, or spot start at DH, you know you're going to get quality at-bats from him, and that's why I think he's valuable. I agree. I think he's kind of locked himself in, unless like somebody says we really want him in a trade for a number 2 starter. He's got to be in it. Okay, then sure, that's a different conversation. But I think you can lock him in as, yeah, he's on this team next year as a fourth outfielder and kind of a platoon, get guys off in the outfield and at first base.
More of the reason that you need to trade Dylan Carlson then.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole conversation there.
Because apparently they still think Walker's going to be a DH a lot this next season if he's not the right fielder. So you got a lot of DH situations right now.
You do a little bit. I think
we overestimate the DH thing.
I think so too. Like Wilson Contreras.
Not if Wilson Contreras is going to be doing it 75 to 80% of the time next season.
But I don't think he's going to do that much. I think it's going to be a lot like this year.
50-50 split.
Yeah.
Next year with what you've got a catcher. And if that ends up being the case, like, let's say you've got a 10-game stretch, right? We did this at the beginning of the year with the outfield mix where you're like, oh, you can kind of make this work easier than a lot of people are anticipating as long as you've got that position flexibility. And that's where, like, Tommy Edman helps you in that regard. He can play all over the place. Brendan Donovan helps you in that way. I think Alec Burleson, honestly, fits into this in a significant way because he can play first or corner outfield spot. When you've got that flexibility there, that really helps a lot. The problem was when they were carrying the 3 catchers earlier this year. I don't think they should do that next season. If you have Contreras in the lineup as a DH, you've just got to be willing to lose the DH later on in the game. Like, that has to be something that they philosophically change their perspective on, because if you're doing that, the chances are, because you're doing it for Herrera, he's going to be your catcher on those days, chances are it's late in a game and you're going to be able to pinch hit for that pitcher that's coming in anyway. So that's something that they need to keep in mind. But I think they're all right. Most of these things, I think it will work themselves out. Final thing here before we get to believe it or not on the other side, 314-399-9646. If you guys could have one next year, one of these two, and let's assume that both of them have very little trade value elsewhere, would you rather bring back Tyler O'Neill next year or Dylan Carlson?
O'Neill.
Tyler O'Neill.
And, like, I say that even though there's, like, major concerns about him staying healthy, but, like, look at him right now. Like, it's easy to see why, through all his issues of staying healthy, why the Cardinals can continue to say, let's run it with Tyler O'Neill. He's been awesome since he came back. He's a 5-tool player that just, for whatever reason, has not been able to put it together on the field.
I would, too. I would too. The chances of Tyler O'Neill coming back to bite you next year in a big way are way higher than the chances of Dylan Carlson doing it.
On both ends.
Yeah. Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. I'll slow down here for Believe It or Not here on 101 ESPN. All that matters.
Oh, yeah.
T-Bone told us that this doesn't really play on YouTube very well.
Yeah, no, we definitely need the music.
Sell it on radio, boys.
Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so
free.
Flying away on a wing and a prayer.
Who could it be?
Believe it or not, It's just me.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Believe It or Not.
I bet that second part that I do it looks great on YouTube.
I'm sure it does. By the way, you guys can check us out on YouTube at 101 ESPN STL. That is where you go to find it. It's T-Bone's favorite segment of the week. We like to call it Believe It or Not. All right, boys, let's start with this, guys. Believe it or not, Lars Nootbaar is your starting center fielder in 2024.
God, he just keeps hammering that nail, and when it's in the wood, and it's like, dude, you're good. He just says, nope. Making sure it's in there.
You're going to strip the nail, man.
I'm going to believe it, by the way.
Shocker.
I don't think you can strip a nail, too, by the way, buddy.
That's a screw.
That's a screw.
I've learned that in the last 6 months.
Screw.
Sorry.
You don't strip the nail, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
Well,
you got it.
It's another discussion for another day.
You nailed the screw.
Yeah.
That's sex ed class. Believe in this one. Good talk, guys.
Tanner doesn't remember the question.
Well, no, I thought he was going to elaborate on why he believed
Why
it.
do I need to elaborate? We've spent 3 segments today elaborating on it. What else do I need to say that this guy over here hasn't dug into an Excel
Can I ask you a
sheet?
different one?
All right.
Believe it or not,
Hold
you
on,
have
I got to get my answer on that one.
Okay.
Believe it. And if you want my explanation, go and listen to the 1 o'clock and 11:30.
There was a guy I used to work with at KMOX. His name was Fred Bottomer. He was a producer for Mark Reardon's show, and he used to carry like a manila folder filled with papers for the show prep. I mean, that's how he did his show prep. That's what I imagine BK's backseat of his car looks like, filled with Lars Nootbaar information of why he's better than this
I was
individual.
about to say, it's actually just Dylan Carlson stuff, and this Lars is my segment of the day today as to why Dylan Carlson's overvalued. Believe it or not, you had no idea the NFL season kicked off tonight with the Hall of Fame game.
Believe it.
Yeah, believe it.
Genuinely heard Randy talking about it this morning. I was like, what the flip? Football is back?
What the football? Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing until I heard the update.
I was in the office this morning, and I was scrolling through Twitter right before we started our show meeting, and I saw something about Kellen Mond versus Zach Wilson. I was like, what the hell? Why are they talking about Zach Wilson and Mond? And I was like, oh my gosh, the Hall of Fame game tonight. Yeah, I'm not going to watch that, but you can listen to it here on 101 ESPN.
Zach Wilson's making the start. You can check it out.
I mean, if you want to watch bad football, Zach's your guy.
That's your game. All right, boys, believe it or...
By the way, Daily Fantasy back tonight, boys. This is where we win.
You're doing daily fantasy on preseason football?
Absolutely. I've got a website that I go to. They do all the projections.
Do you do that website with somebody else and then take all of the money when you win and don't split it with them?
Yes, actually.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's exactly what I do.
You got a problem if
you got a...
You're good.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I think people have problems with is when you bet on preseason.
I'm not betting. I'm just playing daily fantasy.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Isn't that called betting?
Yeah.
No,
like,
totally
are you putting
different.
money towards something
it's a
so that if
skill
you
game.
win money?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, that's chess, and I'm also not good at that. Believe it or not, by the end of their careers, Lars Nootbaar will have more All-Star games than Dylan Carlson.
Yeah, believe it, of course. Carlson 0, Noot 1.
Let's just call this the Dylan Carlson v. Nootbaar show.
One. We don't need to do any more Carlson.
Okay.
Give us something.
Believe it or not, Dylan Carlson. No, I'm out. I'm out on that then. I don't have any more Dylan Carlson ones.
No.
Go ahead,
Do
T-Bone.
you have anything non-Carlson related?
No, sorry. It's been ingrained in my head today.
That's my bad.
Yeah, way to go, BK. Believe it or not, we were just having kind of this conversation off air. Believe it or not, Ivan Herrera will be on the Cardinals roster come opening day next year. Not starting, but on the roster.
And
you may
I'm
be
going to
saying,
believe it because I think that they're going to end up trading Andrew Kisner this offseason. I looked this up during the break and genuinely had no idea. Do you know Andrew Kisner has the 3rd highest slugging percentage on the Cardinals this year?
And coming up next, why Andrew Kisner is better than Ivan Herrera.
No.
He's been eating his Wheaties, man. El Capitan.
I had no idea that it was that high. Like, I just haven't really been looking a whole lot at what Andrew Kisner has done offensively. It's been a pretty good year for him, especially when it comes to the slug. Now he has 4 walks on the season.
We don't need those. Who walks anymore? His return from that injury significantly has benefited Andrew Kisner. I'm also going to say believe it because this team's going to carry 3 catchers on opening day. It's going to be Herrera, Kisner, and Contreras because they'll view Contreras as a DH.
And an outfielder.
And probably an outfielder. He'll be the 4th outfielder.
See, I'm not going to believe it because I think they will use Herrera. I wonder all the talk about, and Girsch said this when he was on with us. You know, people had a lot of interest in our young position players. I wonder if they try to avoid using some of those and package a Herrera with a Carlson and another prospect to go get a young cost control pitcher. I mean, it's tough to find a good quality catcher, and Herrera was good when he was up here, both with the bat and defensively, and he's had a great year in Memphis. And if you think, not just think it, and I think Kisner's proven this, Kisner can be a really good backup / 50-50 split guy with Wilson Contreras. I think you keep that guy right now and you sell high on Ivan Herrera because I think you can get more in return for him than Kisner. So I'm not believing it.
Believe it or not, the Cardinals should pinch hit Andrew Kisner for Dylan Carlson late in games.
Wait, what are they facing?
I'm just kidding. A right-handed pitcher. I'm just kidding.
And Dylan Carlson's a faster runner, so.
Guys,
get in the cage with Kiz.
Believe it or not, we will see super conferences in college football by the end of next season. Have you guys seen some of these reports that are coming out now? Can I go on a soapbox real quick?
I mean, you've been on one. You've had like
this
3 today.
Damn, I should have taken today off.
Yeah,
I hate the direction that college football is going. I really do. The Big 12 was really fun when Mizzou was in it, with KU and Oklahoma and Nebraska. Like the rivalries that Mizzou had that were historic and were geographically, they made sense. That was cool. The Big 10, when I knew where the programs were located by looking at a map, that was pretty cool.
I'll still be able to find USC on a map.
Rutgers, USC, UCLA, maybe Oregon. And this sucks. I don't like the direction that college football is heading, or college sports in general. I understand it. It's all about the money, but it sucks. And I think it's bad for everybody involved. And it would have been better if we had just found a way. If the NCAA actually did anything, like they had a job and they actually did it, we would have the conferences that we had in 2011, and we all just would have figured out a way to split the money a little bit more evenly. But that's not the way the world works. I understand. In my panacea, it would have worked that way. But I think that we will see 2 super conferences, and then the Big 12 and the ACC are kind of the second tier conferences. It'll be like a Super League or the Premier League over in Europe for soccer.
If only we had relegation, I'd be all in. But yeah, I'll believe this too. And I kind of agree with you. I'm not happy with the way things are going because it's obvious it's not for the better of the sport. It's just better for more money for the school to make. And I hate when that's how sports go. And that's why I hate expanded playoffs in every league when they do it, because it's not about, oh, we want everybody to experience the playoffs. No, it's about you want to make more money. And I find that to be annoying. So, yes, I will believe this. I think we're going to see it. I don't know if it will be necessarily the year you put on there, but we're definitely going to get to that point.
Same.
No elaboration.
Do you need me to elaborate on that one, too?
We don't have a previous segment of you explaining that one.
I think you guys nailed it on the head. You stripped the nail.
Thank you.
Do you think Florida State's leaving the ACC?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody want Florida State?
No.
We'll take them.
You notice how Florida State, I don't know if you guys saw yesterday, they had a big meeting publicly, which was basically a pep rally. Yeah. Where they're like, we're going to leave the ACC. We're going to go somewhere else unless they make us an offer we can't refuse. No, you haven't heard from any other team the entire time in conference realignment that ended up leaving their conference was that. Not a single one of them. Everybody was like cloak and dagger suddenly in the middle of the night. Oh, Colorado's going to the Big 12? Wait, USC and UCLA are heading to the Big 10? Mizzou? Texas A&M? What? It was all shocking. You could follow it and you saw what was happening behind the scenes, but nobody said anything publicly. Meanwhile, Florida State is all in on the public pressure for the ACC. It makes me think they're going to be in the ACC next year, because I don't think anybody else wants them.
No, I would agree with that, because I don't think you're doing this publicly, because like you said, these conferences like to keep this kind of hidden, and then it's just, ta-da, here it is. This team's going to come over here. Florida State, meanwhile, has been as public as anybody. There's no chance they're leaving the ACC.
Somebody on the text line said, how do they get more money if there are more teams and more travel? It's all about inventory. That's it. It's all about the money for the TV rights deals and being able to get the most markets possible for them to be able to, quote unquote, sell that market on your team being on TV. It's all it is. It's all it is right now. And as leagues are moving even more towards streaming, it's another big part of this as well. How many people are going to buy our streaming package because of your fan base?
And the Big Ten has I don't remember who I heard say this. I think it was Paul Feinbaum. has a like NFL type package with their TV deal. Like they've got games being streamed on Peacock, I think, starting this year. NBC.
I think soon enough, a lot of this stuff will be on Netflix, Apple TV, that kind of stuff. Amazon Prime. You'll be buying games individually or be buying a season package for your conference.
Yeah, and sooner they're going to have like an NFL end zone, a red zone or something like that for all of them.
Coming up next, which Western Conference team that missed the playoffs last year is most likely to make it in the NHL in 2024? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendricks here with a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals took down Minnesota last night 7-3, and the rubber match of the three-game set is tonight. 6:45 will be first pitch as Sonny Gray gets the start for the Twins. Matthew Liberatore will be on the mound for the St. Louis Cardinals. And tonight here on 101 ESPN, the NFL is back as it's the Hall of Fame game as the Cleveland Browns take on the New York Jets, and we'll have pregame coverage starting at 6:30. This Sports Center update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Ferrario and Tanner Hendricks, and I'm Brandon Kiley. So earlier today, The Athletic put out their results from their fan poll that they do each and every offseason. And Alex, one of the questions I found particularly interesting as it pertains to the Blues. They asked the responders, which Western Conference team that missed the playoffs last year is most likely to make it in 2024? And the team that got the most votes at 29% was Calgary. Second was none of the teams that missed the playoffs last year will make it in 2024 out of the Western Conference. And then third, of course, was your St. Louis Blues at 23% of the responses. So the vast majority of people that responded to this poll said one of either the Flames, the Blues, or none of the above. Alex, who do you think your answer would be to that question? Which team from the West is most likely to get in next year?
I would say it's the Blues, because the other teams that were on this list, Calgary, I think Calgary probably has, I don't want to say the better overall roster, but I think Calgary has the right pieces if they want to try. I mean, they were 2 points out of a playoff spot last year, so they could do it, but I also don't see that entire team staying together all season. I think you're going to see a lot of pieces sold off at least by the deadline, if not before, for Calgary, because you don't want to lose these guys for nothing.
Are you surprised that a lot of those pieces are still there?
Yeah, I am. But, I mean, Craig Conroy said that they were going to be patient with this stuff. They weren't just going to trade guys to trade guys. I think when they realized Lindholm's not going to re-sign with them, you have to trade Lindholm, even if you're in a race for it. And if you realize Noah Hannafin wants out, you trade him, too. So those are going to be the two big pieces. And then, of course, you're relying on Markstrom, who's very inconsistent. So I just don't see Calgary as a team that's there. Nashville is absolutely blowing that thing up, even with the additions that they brought in of Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen. Still going to be a team that's rebuilding or retooling. And Vancouver, to me, isn't a team that really has an identity. Like, they're bringing back the same roster that didn't have an identity last year. No real big additions. I think when you look at the Blues, they were 14 points out of a playoff spot. If you consider the pieces that they brought in terms of the forward additions, I could see that team being a team that wins 5 or 6 more wins. And then the other part of it, too, is just if you look at the bottom of the West, I just don't really see a lot of competition for those 2 wild card spots.
So that's what I was going to ask you is like, okay, so if we think that somebody's getting in, that means somebody has to be booted out. Who do you think is the most likely team to miss out on the playoffs this year that made it last year?
Winnipeg. Winnipeg
Really?
would be the biggest one for me, because I
don't know, man. I think they might have gotten better. I know that sounds weird because they were a team that all offseason was talked about as like selling off all of their assets. Really what they did was they got rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois, but in return they got like real NHL pieces for him.
Yeah, but just like Calgary, I don't believe those pieces are going to still be in Winnipeg by the end of the season. Like, You're not just going to let Connor Hellebuck walk because you really don't have the replacement in place. And I don't know if you view your team as somebody who can let him go and your team still be competitive. He's the identity of that team. And if he's not willing to re-sign there, which he has made it very clear, you're going to have to make some type of bold move there. The same can be said about Mark Scheifele.
Yeah,
Seattle's another one that I'm very curious about. Seattle had an incredible season. There's no question. You put 100 points up, you should be a team that's viewed on the rise. But I also view that as a team that had to pay a lot more money to players that weren't making as much. You lost certain players. They lost a couple of their forwards, and they lost Carson Soucy. And you're talking about a goaltender who had an incredible season.
That's the biggest question to me is like, can they repeat what they did last year from a goal suppression standpoint?
Yeah, I think the top 6 are very clear-cut who's the playoffs. Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota, Vegas, Edmonton, LA. And then the final 2 spots, to me, is a battle amongst 5 teams. Seattle, Winnipeg, Calgary, St. Louis.
I want to
Vancouver.
I so badly want to say that it's the Blues. That would be this team for me. I just have such question marks about this, what they're doing defensively, man. I do wonder if the defense is going to be a repeat of what it was a year ago, and I think they'll be better from the forwards. But the defensive the defensive group overall is it's really concerning. And then secondarily, I think the Blues might view the trade deadline once again as a chance to sell off some of these pieces. Like, I don't think it should surprise anybody if Vrana and Kapanen are viewed as trade assets this year at the deadline. Vrana could really get something in return. There's going to be a team that loses a goal scorer, and they look at the Blues and say, Vrana's got 20 goals and we're at the All-Star break. Can we go ahead and get that guy? Because he's going to help us as a third-line winger that plays 14 minutes a night for us, and we hope that he can really add some scoring punch, like the Carolina Hurricanes. Classic team, always, every year, we're asking, okay, who's their go-to guy that's going to finish for him? Vrana could be that guy at the deadline, where the Blues get a second-round pick for him or something.
And I absolutely agree with that. I would say Vrana's going to be that big selling piece for the Blues. I think they probably try and keep Kapanen if he has a good season, but your reason
Blake could be this guy too.
Yeah.
Reasonably.
The reason you sell Vrana, and I still believe the team can be competitive, is if you're selling Vrana, one of your prospects is having an unbelievable season, and you say, we can be the same team if we take out Vrana and add in a Bolduc or a Zachary Dean.
Or you're kind of middling, and Doug Armstrong looks at the team, assesses it, says, we're not going to win anything meaningful this year. Let's go ahead and get the second-round pick, and now we'll go ahead and put, maybe it's Bolduc, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's Zach Dean, right? And they put him in at center, move Hayes over, or move Shin over to one of the wing spots, and they decide, okay, this is going to be better for an opportunity for us. And then 2024-25, that next season is really when the Blues decide to go for it.
The only reason I would be optimistic about the Blues is these other teams that we're talking about, to me, I don't think they have an identity. Winnipeg is this in-between life right now. Calgary is in this in-between life. Nashville's in the same spot that the Blues are, but with a lot more younger pieces that you're hoping to find out. And Vancouver's in this unknown. And St. Louis, I think they know what their identity is. They think they learned.
What do you think it is?
I think it's offense. I think we're going back to 2021 where we're saying we're going to outscore our issues on the defensive side. You get slight improvements from certain players. You get health from certain players. We're a team that will score a ton of goals, but a team that's not going to be great defensively. And I don't know if I could say the same thing for Winnipeg, Calgary, or for the Vancouver Canucks.
He's Alex Ferrario. That's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, we'll hit the BK and Ferrario Rewind to finish things up here on 101 ESPN. One of the two pitchers that we see tonight, I think, is going to be in the Cardinals rotation next year. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got Matthew Liberatore going up against Sonny Gray of the Minnesota Twins. Matthew Liberatore, by the way, this is a really good opportunity for him tonight. The Twins are terrible against left-handed pitching. One of their three best hitters against lefties is out tonight. Their best guy is Royce Lewis, who's not a great hitter. He's fine. Matthew Liberatore should look pretty good against this lineup, Alex. So I've got my fingers crossed that you see one of his better starts. If he gives you like 5 innings, 2 earned runs against, that's something that you can you can hope about moving forward. So that's what I'm looking forward to most. But I also honestly want to see what Sonny Gray looks like against this Cardinals lineup.
Of course you do.
I mean, Sonny Gray's been good, but he's slowed down. He started out so hot this year. He was pretty good in the middle portion of the season, and then in the month of July, he has a 4.8 ERA. He's been fine, like going 6 innings for them in the majority of his starts still, but he's just given up a little bit more hard contact. So I'm curious to see what that looks like.
The Liberatore one's intriguing to me on the one side. We were talking about this during the break. Like, Dakota Hudson pitched really well, and I don't think anybody expected that, me including last night against the Twins. And if Liberatore can go out there and perform against a Twins team that struggles against lefties, their offense isn't the best, that at least gives you some hope. Like, okay, you could do it against major league talent. We just got to figure out why you struggle against the better offensive teams. But on the other side of it, I really wonder if the Cardinals brass is just looking at Liberatore and saying, even if he gets blown up, does he have swing and miss stuff? Because it's pretty obvious they want the swing and miss. And if you don't have it, I think you might be cast off an island sooner or later by this Cardinals team.
Yeah, I think if he gets roughed up tonight, I mean, you could probably just erase his name from the plans for 2024. I think that's how important the start is because of what you said. Twins are bad against lefties. They're not a great offense, and I just saw Dakota Hudson shove against Minnesota.
And have swing and miss stuff against that team.
So, like, if Liberatore really struggles tonight, I know it sounds like a stretch. I mean, I think it might be done for Matthew Liberatore. He'll probably continue to get starts.
Is that about numbers or how it looks?
I think it's how it looks. I think if it's like blue, I think it's just if he gives up like 4 earned and there's like an error that extends an inning, it's not earned. And then you've also got things along the lines in terms of blue hits that lead to runs. Like there are exceptions to it, but I think it is a matter of how it looks for Matthew Liberatore.
Coming up tomorrow, we'll tell you why Dakota Hudson is a better option for the Cardinals than Matthew Liberatore. We'll have 3 segments of it.
I think no matter what, Libby gets at least one more start, right?
I agree with that.
I think you're playing him the rest of the season.
Yeah,
like
I think
you are with Hudson.
Let's find out what this looks like. And I mean, if the next 3 starts are really bad for him, maybe you end up trying to see what it looks like out of the bullpen in shorter stints. But for the next few, I think he's guaranteed to be in your rotation for the foreseeable future, and then we see what it looks like from there. Alex will be watching that tonight. We'll also be checking out what you've got going on this week as well.
Yeah, tomorrow from 3 to 5 o'clock, I'll be at the Ironman 55 of the Federated Auto Parts Raceway on I-55 out in Peevely, the World of Outlaws. NOS Energy Sprint cars are back for the high-speed weekend, including the most challenging race on the tour, which is the Ironman 55. So come on out, say hi to me from 3 to 5 o'clock tomorrow, and then enjoy it all weekend long. The extravaganza taking place at the Federated Auto Parts Raceway at I-55 in Peevely, Missouri. Get details at 101ESPN.com.
Cardinals versus the Twins tonight. Get excited. It's Sunny Gray Day here in St. Louis. For Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. If you've missed any of the show today, be sure to check out the podcast page. We talked with Cardinals General Manager Michael Girsch earlier today, so you'll find that on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com. The free 101 ESPN app. You can also check it out on YouTube, youtube.com/101ESPN. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. The Fast Lane's coming up next.